Mom, I'm making this tape to let you know that I'm still okay, and to explain a few things, I hope.
LA members here are very upset about press distortions of what's been happening. I'm kept blindfolded, usually, so that I can't identify anyone.
Greetings to the people, comrades, sisters, and brothers. General Field Marshal Sin speaking.
It's a new dawn and a new day, and that means, unfortunately, it's time for a new episode of Death by DVD.
I'm Linnea, and I like Death by DVD. It's a statement.
You are listening to Harry Scott Sullivan. I will be your host on this installment, and this episode's subject matter is something that I regret almost immediately picking to do on the show. It's a real hog leg, if you know what I mean, and I don't think you do, because not many people speak redneck-ese. There's not many hillbilly to English dictionaries that you can use, but it means it's going to be really big. There's going to be a lot of stuff jam-packed into this. A lot of information is going to be shoved in and around your eye and ear holes. Well, not so much your eye holes, but if you do choose to watch this movie, there hopefully will be maybe it'll inspire you to view a lot more, or read a lot more, or maybe you won't even care once I announce what the movie is. I don't know. But we are going to be talking about a movie from 1988, directed by Paul Schrader, screenplay by Nicholas Kazan, and based on the book by Patricia Campbell Hearst, a film aptly titled Patty Hearst. And what's it about, do you ask? Oh, I'm glad you did. It's about Patty Hearst. Now, here lies one of the problems and why I immediately have begun regretting this idea. The themes and subject matter that we're going to be getting into are perfect for the political climate right now in the United States, and for all of our overseas listeners that are watching the United States burn down, get ready, because the far right's coming for everybody. And I don't mean to, say that maliciously, like old man yelling at sky, but for real, the rise of fascism is alarming, I guess, to me. Your humble host for this episode. And this is one of those things that really might open your eyes to the fact that, and throughout this episode, there's going to be several points. I don't feel I need to make them clear every time I make a point. I hope, educationally perhaps, you as the audience will be able to take and pick up on those points. But one that is very, 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 very important is this. And it is the fact that history, if forgotten, will continuously repeat itself. Because when you don't remember these awful things that happen, it's just a way for them to keep happening, and the people that allowed them to happen, or coerced them to happen, or forced them to happen, they're in power, and they're going to make it happen again and again and again and again and again, because they can, because you forget about it. Now, I can't chide everyone, because it's not always a matter of forgetting, but I'm feeling really right now, as I've researched for the last couple weeks, and immersed myself in Patty Hearst. Most people under 40 don't really remember her or know who she is. They might recognize the name from a John Waters film, but the SLA and Patty Hearst isn't really popular culture anymore, which is very alarming. It's very scary, because the political climate in which the story that you're going to learn tonight, you're going to hear all about the movie, and before we get into that, they'll have a real special treat, because this whole rant, it's going to go somewhere. You just hold on. The political climate was really no different. A heinous, evil man was president of the United States, and 2 weeks after the events that start off this story take place, he was brought up for impeachment. Now, the American people in 2020 rather, have done something a little bit differently than the people of 1972. The people of 1972 re-elected the evil, heinous man I'm talking about, Richard Milhouse, cocksucker, Nixon. I'm not fond of him, can you tell? As no American should be, I really think that there needs to be a line crossed, and people remember that line. And where we're living right now, it's just kind of baffling, because Watergate doesn't even seem like it was that much comparatively to the President of the United States trying to incite a fucking coup. This is, again, why I kind of regret doing Patty Hearst, because You're going to learn, whether you like it or not, a bit about me politically. Again, I'm not going to have to say these things. It's not going to be like the points that will be made throughout this show. If you don't get the points, now this is where we might get into some interesting stuff here. If you don't get the points that I'm trying to make, then you might be a fascist. I don't know. I'm not going to point any fingers, but it's going to get spicy. It's going to be a real dill of a pickle. This episode, like I said, I immediately regret doing this, and, you know, it's too late now. I think most of American history can even be summed up as people forgetting the past, and it just beginning to repeat itself over and over and over and over and over again. So before we dive deep into this movie, and it's a Paul Schrader flick, so right off the bat, you know it's got to be stylistic. You know it's going to look good. There's really... What Paul Schrader movie looks bad? That's the thing. I can name you 15 that I think look good. I can't name one thing that looks bad. So really, in my humble opinion, Paul Schrader doesn't really do bad where he might do some boring stuff, some off-the-wall stuff. It might not completely appeal to my interest, but it always really looks good. So you know that much. If you don't know who Patty Hearst is, well, this is the beginning of the show, because we're going to do the who and the what. But I'm going to do the what first, because, you know, usually it's who, why, what, where. But while we go through the what, it's going to give us some names, and we're going to learn about those people. When we get to the who, the where comes into both of those categories. And when we complete all that jibber-jabber...
Cut out the jibber-jabber. Don't be babbling like a fool. Say what you got to say. That's all. Then shut your dang pie hole.
We're going to get into the movie. And I know this sounds like it's going to be, you know, a walk through the desert with a horse with no name. That's not the song. I walked through the desert with a horse with no... I ran through the desert with a horse with no name. Was he just in the desert with a horse with no... What the fuck are we talking about? This is no time for folk rock. We'll get somewhere. God help all of us, actually. I don't know where we're going to get. Just sit back and relax. I've got control, despite how scary that might be. And I'm going to learn you a thing or two. If you know a bunch of stuff about Patty Hearst, sit down and relax and just shut up. Shh. Don't fast forward, just listen to it. You might learn something. Now, this is going to be the difficult part. I obviously have opinions on the situation. I have opinions on this whole story, this case, the truth of the story and the case. And I say the truth not like I know it because I wasn't there, and to be honest, nobody ever will know the true truth to this, because there are so many different sides to what happened, and nearly none of them are able to be heard anymore. Almost specifically, Patty's side is what is available, and Patty's side is what we will be getting into. But to pretense that, we gotta, you know, inform. I say we like somebody else is gonna pop up and talk for me, but it's just me, I'm sorry. No Alexander Nash or Jay Willie, who sounds strikingly like me. But isn't, I swear. I'll take that one to the grave. I'm not Jay Willie. Oh god, I could have picked something like Tremors and just talked about that. But instead, no, Patty Hearst. Let's do Patty Hearst. Any other Paul Schrader movie, really. Which, we'll talk about Paul later. So, the challenge at hand is attempting to present this information to you in an unbiased manner. But a lot of the information that I'm going to tell you before we even get into Patty Hearst, I want it to be a doorway. I want you to know some of these things that I'm going to tell you their proof. I've done research, and in some of these instances, won't always cite where I have found my information, but I believe it's widely available. I've got sources, and I won't ever say 100% trust me, because you should never trust anyone 100%. There's some advice from Death by DVD. Don't ever trust anybody, never, 100%. Always have your own free will. You know, I mean, I'm not saying to be some paranoid bastard with a tinfoil hat on, but keep your antenna up and be aware. Trust yourself more than anybody else. Maybe that sounds less fear and paranoia inducing. Trust yourself more than anyone else. But please fact check, look some of this information up if you are interested in learning more about the situation, as I keep calling it. Patty Hearst, born February 20th, 1954. Let's just read from Wikipedia. Is an American author, an actress, and granddaughter of American publishing company William Randolph Hearst. So that's important. That is important. I was going to say, this is just kind of bullshit, blah, 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 blah. Patty Hearst was kidnapped in 1974 by an organization called the SLA. And she was specifically kidnapped because she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, a family that one could say, one being me, has controlled propaganda in the media for many, 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 many years. This was something that is sentiment shared by the SLA. And who are these people? What does this acronym stand for, Hank? This show is going to have a great deal of acronyms on it. The SLA kidnapped Patty Hearst because 2 of their soldiers had been arrested, and they wanted to do a prisoner exchange. Now, who are the SLA, and why were 2 of their soldiers arrested? The SLA stands for the United Federated Forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army, shortened to SLA. They're an American organization that I think, interestingly enough, is referred to as one of the first left-wing domestic terrorist organizations. Isn't that a fun word? Terrorism. It's a noun, and it is defined as the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. Fair. That's fair enough. You could, in the later years of the SLA, accuse them of terrorism. The Symbionese Liberation Army proudly toted that the SLA will never die as long as there is one oppressed person left on the planet. Interestingly enough, they are called domestic terrorists. Now, there is just point to that. We'll get to the just point because we actually have to get into the movie where all of these things will be discussed and more. But terrorist, domestic terrorist, these are terms that are incredibly important, and they are mostly important to help identify hundreds of years later when people are reading about these awful acts that happen in history so they don't let them be repeated, that we know who the fucking bad guys are. In the United States of America, everyone is absolutely aware of what happened in Washington, D.C. A group of armed domestic terrorists invaded buildings that are literally considered holy to our democracy, to the United States democracy, in an attempted coup incited by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. But these men and women are called armed protesters. These goons and thugs that looted Senate. They didn't just steal. They looted. They didn't borrow. They looted and tried to sell on eBay items from one of the most holy buildings in the United States. Capitol, politics, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's not holy. It's not like fucking Vatican City, but when you take the aspect and the idea of democracy and what it stands for, I think it almost is something similar to the Holy Roman Rites. There is something very important that needs to be, body of Christ style, acknowledged when it comes to the rights that you have in the United States as an American. Now, the Symbionese Liberation Army has a very, very interesting background, and this is where some of the questionable things, I guess you could say, I'm going to insert into your mind. And later on, I think these things are really going to make you question a lot of the reality, perhaps, to what's going on. But again, the movie we're going to discuss is directly from the perspective and point of view of the lead character, who is Patty Hearst. And we are going to be talking about a movie in the 4 walls of a movie. So what's happening here is just the history. You're getting the background at some point that will help propel through the rest of the story. And then, hey, if you're interested in finding Patty Hearst, guess what? You can get yourself a copy from Vinegar Syndrome. All nice and shiny. A new restoration. It's even got an interview with Paul Schrader himself. The origins of the SLA have its ties all the way to the CIA. Now, isn't that funny? Every time terrorism or domestic terrorism is brought up, whose name's attached to it? That goddamn acronym, the CIA. Mujahideen, come on. We know who did that. And then there's ISIS, which is like super Al-Qaeda, which was just Mujahideen. And it's like, whoa, who's responsible for that? Oh, tricky-ass CIA. They did it too. Let's look at the people that stormed D.C. Now, who do you think is responsible for all that propaganda? Is it probably the CIA? I don't know, probably. It's probably the CIA. Now, I can't just, make blind accusations like that. I know, because this isn't some far fucking left political rambling podcast where I start shining up conspiracy theories and throwing it at you. But hey, here's some cold hard facts. A good portion of all the problems in the world, CIA. CIA did it, is responsible for it. That Vietnam Part 2 war that the United States was involved in, because there's 2 of them. There's the first Indo-Chinese war, then there's Vietnam Part 2, CIA, and fucking Kennedy, whatever. There's, Mamma Mia, we are getting into so many different directions, but the early origins of the SLA can be identified and brought back to the CIA. Little thing called Operation Chaos. The June 1975 report to the President by the Commissions on CIA Activities within the United States identifies Operation Chaos as a collector of information on dissident Americans. Its Project 1 was titled Acquiring Assets in the Peace and Black Power movements in the United States. Project 2 of Operation Chaos begun in late 1969. Read in part, individuals without existing dissident affiliation would be recruited and after recruitment would acquire the theory and jargon and make acquaintances in the New Left while attending school in the United States. So, the idea was to recruit agents who would penetrate the various radical groups. And there was no better recruiting ground than the Black Power movement inside prison. A former CIA spook named Colston Westbrook was teaching at Berkeley, and he was teaching Afro-American studies at Berkeley, and this is where the key to the SLA kind of came forward. A guy named Willie Wolfe, who would later take on the war name of Cajo, which was bastardized and lost in the news as Cujo, something that good old Steve Z. King lifted for the infamous novel Cujo. He was obsessed with the SLA. Gotta give credit to old Weather Underground, all those guys. Really interesting stuff. It shows up through a lot of his work in the late 70s and 80s, references to these radical groups. I'm not going to call the SLA terrorists. I will agree when we get to that point that some of the activities committed by them later on is obviously terroristic, but there's a whole fucking loophole and who was in charge of shit. We'll get to the shit. We'll get to that shit before we finish, or after we finish this. Pardon me, because we're educating. Willie really is the key to everything, because everyone that eventually became core members of the SLA, they knew him. They knew him from school. They knew him from his involvement with the prison programs, which there are two major ones that were radical left-wing groups that were both visiting inmates in the California penitentiary system at the time. The Venchermos Organization and the BCA, Black Cultural Association. And these were both visiting inmates in Soledad Prison, where a man named Donald DeFreeze, who would be better and more infamously known, and I'm going to refer to him as his war name, Sin Q, was serving time. And this was no average criminal. But we'll get to the who in just a little bit, because we're still doing the what. This happens all the time on this show, doesn't it? These organizations would come into the prison systems and would teach Maoism. They would teach urban guerrilla-style warfare, things like the Tupamaros, which there was a full-length film showing what these guys were doing out in Uruguay, kind of Robin Hood-style, robbing the rich to give back to the poor, to help destroy fascism by the community coming together and joining one another. And this was being taught to the inmates, mostly, predominantly African-Americans, and African-Americans that did not have major affiliations. DeFreeze had minor involvement with the Black Guerrilla family and the Black Panther Party, but he, for his own, was just on his own. Incredibly intelligent person. So the SLA hasn't even really formed yet. You have a college student named Willie Wolfe with a lot of his radical college friends. All of these people. The thing is, and what you have to look specifically about this generation, and radicalism in the late 60s and the 1970s, is this is a generation of people who, just years ago, their parents were defeating Hitler. Their parents were fighting the rise of fascism and Nazism, and then you move into the United States with people like Richard Nixon and Johnson and Kissinger, the war in Vietnam. Suddenly, the United States has become Hitler. Suddenly, it's become the Nazis. Going back to my theme of history repeating itself the last 4 years, the rise of fascism is more horrifying now than I even think it was in the 1970s. The villains of the 70s, like Richard Nixon, they don't seem anywhere near as heinous as somebody like Donald Trump, or the future, unfortunately, that Donald Trump could stir up and bring about, because now you can see within the Senate of the United States some of these snakes, some of these evil, vile people that truly only care about their own well-being and moving up a figurative ladder, and they do not care about the American people. They do not care about the health of the American people, and they do not care about freedom. They don't care about the actual essence of what this country is and how sacred voting is and how sacred the right to an election is. Specifically, the fact that almost every election in the United States is fucked up somehow. There always is some form of interference, and for once, we actually had a pretty honest and decent election, and we have these buffoons standing up, lying to the public, lying to people that are easily led. It's fake. Fuck, we don't have proof, but it's fake. This is called fascism, and this is a beast that is preying upon all of us. Now, like I said, everything is CIA-backed, and there's a lot of dubious information when it comes to this. When you get to the FBI files, when you watch movies about Patty Hearst, like the one we're going to be discussing, but I mean like documentaries, when you look up the case on Wikipedia, you don't really get a lot of, well, All this connects back to government agencies around that exact same time period that crack was introduced to inner city neighborhoods, and literally in declassified paperwork from the Nixon administration, we have found out that they tried with all their darndest might to destroy the African American community of the United States of America. All this and more happening right around the same time. The political climate is absolutely fucking insane, as it is right now, because you have to imagine being a black person in the United States of America, probably you feel genuinely hunted. I think you feel ostracized from the world, especially any white community, because time and time again for the white man to step up and do something about the situation has just proven the white man doesn't care. And again, going back to what happened in D.C. recently, we can clearly see that the police know how to not be violent. Really bad time to prove that you guys can actually not use violent force. And it's been said by Joe Biden, it's been said by everyone. I just want to instill and say it again. If all of these people had been of color that stormed the White House, it would have been a fucking massacre. Hundreds would have been dead. What you have here is a lot of jaded children who are very mad at their parents. They're very mad at the world that their parents have left for them and have essentially created for them. And it's not just enough to teach. It's not just enough to be revolutionary. And what really came to mind here was, what if we could get one of these political prisoners? And you've got to take into consideration that, every African American in California serving time, the SLA considered to be political prisoners. And there is some credence to that. There is. But a lot that has to deal with the SLA and the story that we are going to be getting into and that I'm telling you right now is romanticized bullshit. And I'm not going to attempt to romanticize it any more than it already has been, but still, there is some sympathy for the devil, I guess you could say. So what better way to really put your radicalism on the map than to free a political prisoner? And that's it's all really Willie Wolf. It's all Cujo's child, his idea is what I mean by the term child. So that's exactly what they did. They busted out Donald DeFreeze. And by busted out, he was on a work program and walked off of it. So what is the SLA? What have I taught you guys so far? Just what the acronym stands for and a couple of people's names. Told you a little bit about what they believed in. Sort of. The SLA will never die as long as there is one oppressed person. Yeah, that sounds really sweet and really pretty. There were and are many more meanings as to what they were behind. In the manifesto, Symbionese Liberation Army Declaration of Revolutionary War and the Symbionese Program, written by Donald DeFreeze, he states that the name Symbionese is taken from the word symbiosis, and we define its meaning as a body of dissimilar bodies and organisms living in deep and loving harmony and partnership in the best interest of within the body. Again, it sounds good, it sounds cool on paper, but what is it? Power for the people, power to the people. You can put political ideologies on anything. They were heavily inspired by Che, Willie Wolf especially. And despite standing and being motivated completely by black power, Sin-Q was the only African-American member of the SLA. The symbol of this organization was a 7-headed cobra, each head standing for the principles of Kwanzaa: unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith. What Sin-Q tried to organize was a collective that would take the world, that would change the face of the world, would be for the people, by the people, feed the people, protect the people. Again, all of this sounds great on paper, but this is not what happened, and this is not what became factual. Now, the SLA had no name. Donald DeFreeze escapes from prison, immediately goes on the run, and is being hidden by Willie Wolf and company. The first members really was somebody named Ms. Moon and Sin-Q himself, where they were hiding out, and I guess the formation truly began. I still stick to the fact that none of this would have been in existence if it wasn't for Willie Wolf being the connective piece of all of these people. Everyone knew Willie, and all of these things came together through his ambition. From here on out, the pretty on paper aspects of the SLA completely degrades. And now, I think might be a good time for us to get into the who. We've brought up a lot of names. Donald DeFreeze being one of the most important, because he is, despite Willie Wolf connecting things, DeFreeze is the think tank behind everything, I guess you could say. Before his radical future entered his life, he was just a man from Cleveland. He had 4 children. He worked. He wasn't just, as the media tends to paint him, a career crook. That did come later in life. And still, he wasn't an average pimp. He wasn't what you would just assume to be somebody that got in trouble, which is what the media used. They used a black man and let that fill, especially in places like the South, people's minds of what he was beforehand without saying, actually, he was just affected by capitalism, went to prison, ended up learning all of these radical things while in prison. Imagine that. We send people to this place. We send people to internment camps pretty much. And that's where they end up learning all of this. And all of this is run by the state. All of this is controlled by the state. So where's this information coming from? It really just kind of makes me feel, oh, it's coming from the state. Uh-oh. And where's it coming from? Outside of that, who else is controlling it? And how deep does it go? Now, I know I said I'm not going to have a tinfoil hat on here, but there are a lot of things that you need to think about when it comes to this case. And when the terms domestic terrorism are used, it's domestic, it's inside of this, and this happened in the 70s. Obviously, something like this, I mean, they say this was the first time it happened, but insurrection in itself is American. I mean, how did we revolt if it wasn't considered a form of insurrection against the British? You see where I'm going with this? I know if you don't, it's fine. I make the SLA sound like they were a commune holding hands. It was the Symbionese Liberation Army. The motivation behind, even in the formation, was war against fascism, the police being the arm of fascism, the death of the police, death to pigs in general, a heavy motivation behind the SLA. So again, they weren't out picking roses. They weren't minding their own business. There was absolute radical actions. And DeFreeze, previously, his arrests weren't small time. I mean, at one point, the arrest leading to his imprisonment, he had been found with over 400 guns. So that does kind of lead you to think, well, did he just learn all this radicalization in prison? What was going on beforehand? There's a lot of these little interesting facts that you start picking up along the way when you're researching these people and you start falling into the rabbit hole. One of the very, very, very most interesting things is the fact that Patty Hearst visited Donald DeFreeze a year before, multiple times, not just like once, a year before her kidnapping. Isn't that absolutely wild? She was one of many students from Berkeley that had gone to visit him. Willie Wolfe himself was a student from Berkeley. And that's not hearsay, and I'm not pulling that out of my ass. The FBI investigated it. An article from the Ann Arbor Sun, January 22nd, 1976, even mentions there are trailers set up at Vacaville, which is the prison, for privacy of trustees' wives when they come to visit their husbands. Somehow, DeFreeze was granted access. He apparently had private meetings there with Patty Hearst, Nancy Perry, and other eventual SLA comrades. Then, in December 1972, Colston Westbrook resigned from the BCA. Remember, we talked about that guy, Colston Westbrook, and his supposed outrage at the visiting self-taught commies. DeFreeze was transferred to Soledad. He had been inside Vacaville normally on a 90-day holding tank for prison and transition for 3 years. At Soledad, once again, he would gain access to the trustee visitation house and renew a brief relationship with Patty Hearst. And this is before she gets kidnapped. My, how the turntables. And I said earlier, the reason I'm informing you on this information is so when we dive into the body of the movie, you can ask questions. You can ask yourself these questions, and if you decide to go on a quest of learning about this or find the movie, you have an ability to question authority, and what you're given as the authority is the story of Patty Hearst, which I'm not saying I doubt, and that's not what this is about. I'm telling you information that I have learned. I'm talking about the Symbionese Liberation Army and open free information that anyone with the internet can find. So upon escaping from prison, Donald DeFreeze changes his name to Sin Q and gives himself the rank of General Field Marshal. Sin Q being the name of the lead slave on the rebellion of the slave ship Amistad. A very righteous name and symbolic, I believe, of his efforts, despite having, at this point and till the end of his life, a crew of suburban honkies that just wanted change, but they didn't have any idea behind it. The problem with being radicalized at some points is you have all this theory, and that's what you have. You have this Maoist theory, and you can sit down and read Trotsky, and you can read Marx and Engels, and everything is a theory, and you can go to Castro and Che Guevara. You can read the handbooks, you can read the guerrilla warfare, and all it is theory. When you practice it and try to apply it in a society that is afraid of something like that, there's nothing you can do, because even liberals will always end up going for the fascists. Liberals will protect the fascists because socialism is against capital, and that's even at the farthest extent of what we have right now of this left-wing people like Nancy Pelosi. They will always go back to fascism, and they will always have that representation because 100% socialism is against capital. And in theory, everything is precious and works and sounds absolutely great until it's put into action, and this is really where things become problematic and almost sorrowful with the SLA. The members of the SLA all pick war names. Emily Harris becomes Yolanda. William Harris becomes Tico. Nancy Ling Perry becomes Fahija. Camilla Hall becomes Gabi. Patricia Stolsick becomes Ms. Moon. Angela Atwood becomes Galena. And Willie Wolf, of course, Kajo. And we just went over General Field Marshal Sin Q. You also have Joseph Ramiro, who is known by Bo, and Russell Little, who is known as Aussie. And this is where the woeful aspect of things truly begin. The SLA assassinated a man named Dr. Marcus Foster, the first African-American head of education in his area, I believe in California in general. He was forced to introduce a system that would just be name tags, identification system for the students, and he wasn't even 100% for it and had offered a different style. The SLA considered this to be terrorism, and Sin Q considered Marcus to be a puppet for the police state, that he was put in power to convince black people that you could trust the police, and he was grisly assassinated. The SLA began something that they became infamous for, releasing communiques, as they called them.
To those who would bear the hopes and future of our people, let the voice of their guns express the words of freedom. Greetings to the people, comrades, sisters, and brothers. General Field Marshal Sin speaking.
To the media, taking claim immediately for the murder, and people just didn't understand. I mean, the media itself thought it was some right-wing fringe group that had attacked. Coming to find out that it was the SLA, something that seemingly stood for black power, it baffled most of them. And here's where the genius of things really comes into play here, and here is, I guess, the beauty also of some of the things here. Those names I just gave you, that was the SLA. Later on, of course, there are other members, Patty Hearst, Wendy Yoshimura, who also had ties, was a former member of the Revolutionary Army prior to Willie Brandt's incarceration. But those names, that is the SLA. Sin Q had managed to convince the world, not just the FBI, not just the CIA, but the world, that there were armed cells, hundreds, if not thousands, of SLA members waiting in attack squads, waiting to take the world back. And they were genuinely afraid of him. The world was afraid of Sin Q. And anything you read about this now, and I keep bringing up the Wikipedia article just because it's so censored. It's so bafflingly dull and leaves out so much actual real information that I think is important for people to acknowledge and study the who, what, when, and where of what happened. The world was afraid of this man. The world truly, for at least a year, thought the SLA was armed and waiting. And what were they armed and waiting, and what did they want? At this point, it truly isn't clear. The genius behind it, and at this point is where I'm at in the story, it's truly not clear. The genius behind it, though, is how this managed to all come about, how this one man, Sin Q, managed to form all of this and terrify the entire world. Many, many people, including Huey Newton, will say they don't agree with the actions committed by the SLA, but their meaning, there's not much wrong with. In fact, Newton wrote an open letter stating that the Black Panther Party were not affiliated with the Symbionese Liberation Army, but the problem was real, and that they had tried to feed the poor. We've not gotten there yet, but you even have a semblance of kinship with many other organizations, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Black Panther Party, people in the Pan-African movement in general. But outside of that, you had a lot of genuine honkies, a lot of youth, a lot of people that, as I said, were disillusioned with the fact that they came from a generation that helped destroy fascism and were watching their country quickly become fascists. The SLA was embraced, even though the absolute awful nature of the Marcus Foster murder. But that quickly was skirted underneath the rug because after the Marcus Foster murder, drumroll, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. I think finally we have come full circle here. And it's really hard because obviously I said I wasn't going to try and have any bias, but I've had quite a lot of my own bias on this situation. But two of the facts that I've told you I think are really important to take into consideration, and these are two things that I stand by, one of which is Patty Hearst definitely was visiting people that would become major players in the SLA before her kidnapping. And 2, anything that you can link to domestic terrorism or terrorism in the last 50 years, it's the CIA. Look at the CIA, look in their direction. They are responsible one way or another. Whew, man, seriously, could have just talked about Tremors. We would have been done with this by now. I mean, how many Michael Gross facts could I fill in an hour-long show? I don't know, probably a lot, actually. I'm always a surprise. I think more than anything, I've come off more sympathetic to the SLA. I haven't passed a lot of judgment on them, and it is necessary to do so because a lot of the acts that were committed by them are just completely atrocious. And we don't need to glide over the murder of Marcus Foster. It was devastating and completely senseless, and it matches some of the later behavior of the SLA. Not a lot of thought was put into things. And I mean, I have to take that back though, because when you look at what Sin-Q was trying to do and his perspective and his point of view, there's no sensibility to it. Okay, first things fucking last. There's never sensibility to murder, and especially shotgunning somebody down in the dark of night. There's not. But it wasn't some blind call for attention. They could have had there were so many other targets that they could have taken out if they wanted to draw specific attention to themselves. That was something specific. We just don't know that side of the story, and here lies another horrible problem as to why I regret doing Patty Hearst. And I've talked about this briefly, but there are so many sides to this, and we're just not able to get those sides anymore. We have Patties, and we have Patties and the surviving SLA members, and none of them corroborate one another. None of them fit with one another, and we just don't know the truth behind it. We just don't really know why Sin-Q ordered this hit and partook in it, and why it went down. But this led to the arrest of Joseph Romero Bowe and Russell Little Aussie. They were cruising around town and got arrested with some SLA propaganda. They had guns on them, and they became the poster boys. They were immediately arrested. 2 people that had never once in their entire early bourgeoisie life served a day in jail in 24 hours were sent to San Quentin. And they didn't snitch. At first. I'm sure, years later, when shit really hit the fan, there was probably a whole lot of snitching, and everybody rolled over that could. But they stuck fucking to it. The SLA didn't take this lightly whatsoever, so they ordered a warrant for the arrest of the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst. On February 4th, 1974, the SLA kidnaps Patty Hearst. She's kidnapped from her Berkeley residence, where they kicked the living, loving shit out of her fiancé. Many people ask, how did they know where to find her? She had published her engagement vows, and it let the whole world know the area she lived in. But then we can go back to that whole thing that there is a good deal of evidence that Patty had visited Sin-Q in prison a year before her kidnapping. So I don't know what to believe. This isn't the point, though. I'm just allowing you to go into this with every angle available to you. Now, just to point out some of the buffoonery of the FBI, found in an abandoned SLA safe house were plans to kidnap Patty on January 17th, and the FBI did nothing about it. She's taken on February 4th, and the specific and sole reason that Patty Hearst has been kidnapped is for a prisoner release. The SLA has taken the granddaughter of one of the richest men in the United States of America, one of the richest men in the world, and a man that's responsible for a great deal of propaganda. Then Governor Ronald Reagan immediately shoots this down. And the SLA had already been given the title of terrorist, so one can only be led to think that Reagan did what he did throughout his presidency, and I'm not gonna talk to you terrorist, I'm not gonna deal with this. A lot of the problems that came to be with the immediate kidnapping of Patty Hearst and the weeks to follow that could have easily been solved by the Hearsts, the California Police Department, and Ronald Reagan himself, and they allowed it to escalate. As always, they pushed the situation. Now, the demands and the things that SLA wanted, of course, could be considered unreasonable, but if you consider feeding and clothing the poor completely unreasonable, oh well. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you might be a fucking fascist. I don't know! And I guess with that, we are done with the who and the what. And the where, it's California. That one wasn't that long. Didn't take long to get that information out. God, I could have talked about Tremors and Tremors 2 at this point and been done! Now we can begin the story of Patty Hearst in her own words. And believe it or not, that was the abridged who, what, when, and where. I think what makes this increasingly difficult is the amount of information that is available. And, of course, when this first happened, none of this was. FBI files that are declassified years later. The internet being able to find all these articles, being able to find all the communiques from the SLA and hear their words and hear the police words and immerse yourself into this subject matter, it becomes really, really hard to, I wouldn't say pick a side, but be able to tell the story without including as much of this information as possible. And where this becomes kind of a rabbit hole that we're going to get lost into is most of it's not relevant or important to the fact of the movie. And I tell you all of these things, so at least if you do decide to watch this or venture into the world of Patty Hearst and the SLA, you'll have these things in your head. You'll be able to recognize and maybe have some acknowledgement that not everything reported in the media, not all the sensationalism that you are given by the media is 100% true. And that will come very handy when we discuss Patty herself and when we discuss the SLA and what we are shown of them in Paul Schrader's film. Because the real Patty Hearst is just that, is a person, is real. All of these people were real. All of these things, I think, need to be taken outside of the four walls of film and actually really looked at and examined here, not just in I like true crime and I think it's neat, but this is quote-unquote domestic terrorism from the left in the United States, and this is a term that is so easily applied to people, because it's led by a black guy? We cannot call the people that raided fucking Senate domestic terrorists, but the SLA. See, there is so much we haven't gotten into yet. So I guess this is where we get back into things. Where did I stop? Oh yeah, the movie, that's right. The movie. I guess the best place to start is with who directed it. When it comes to the work of Paul Schrader, I don't think he has ever shied away from something that could be intimidating. And when it comes to Patty Hearst, what was the biggest and most important thing is telling Patty's story and it being factual on her story, from her perspective, what was her story based on her memoirs and everything included in that. Now, unfortunately, the movie is hyper-condensed. The only way to tell the story would have been in a 8, 9, 10-hour format, a miniseries or something like that, something that Paul Schrader himself even wishes could have been the way, but in 1988, that just wasn't the way. So the movie's condensed into a 2-hour format, which you don't really get any of the people that I just spent 40 minutes talking about. Willie Wolfson, Q, they're all in the film, but there is no characterization. There is no in-depth study upon these people, and you don't really even get to sympathize with them as humans. And that is for an intentional point here, because as I said, this is Patty's story from her point of view. And there is no, questioning what we are given in this four walls, because what Paul Schrader did was tell that story. Paul Schrader is one of my favorite talents. He's responsible for Hardcore. It's an amazing movie. The 80s were really interesting for him. He did Hardcore, then American Gigolo, then Cat People. All three of those just very, very, very different movies. In 88, he did Patty Hearst. And then moving into the 1990s, you've got Light Sleeper, The Comfort of Strangers. One of my favorite movies, Autofocus from 2002. Got Adam Resurrected from 2008, an incredibly interesting film. Throughout his entire career, his style visually has moving forward, I feel, constantly moving forward, constantly evolving, changing. He is a brilliant artist, and something that really is a great particular with Paul Schrader is his ability to pull in really, really talented DPs. A good cinematographer can save absolutely everything, and in this case, a guy named Bojan Bazili was behind the camera, and this is a fellow that, as you can see if you get into this film, is obsessed with light. And one of the most immaculate and beautiful things about Patty Hearst is the use of just pure, bright, ultra-white light. Schrader is a hard animal to discuss. I mean, his writing is, I think, some would argue, much more prolific than his directing. He wrote Taxi Driver. Of course, that's one of the big ones. Another one of my favorite movies he's responsible for, Rolling Thunder from 1977, Tommy Lee Jones and William Devane. Great, great, great movie. Did The Mosquito Coast, Last Temptation of Christ. Screenplay for The Last Temptation of Christ. Based on a book by a Greek guy whose name I can't say. It's hard to try and imagine another director tackling this. I know this really got passed around quite a bit. Nicholas Kazan did the screenplay based on Patty's autobiography, and Nicholas Kazan is the son of Elia Kazan. So, with that name comes, for one, a lot of money and a lot of talent. And for the most part, his entire script is what ended up being used by Paul Schrader. Some stuff was changed. I think the ending was changed a little bit. He came in and added his flair to it, but for the most part, it is Kazan's script. And what really makes this movie difficult is the first third of the film takes place in a closet, entirely in a closet with your lead character blindfolded. So you can see why a lot of directors probably passed on this, and the intimidation of, how do you present these people? What are you going to do with this? Are you going to tell? And here, this is, a great thing about Paul Schrader. But a lot of people, you look at the story and you look at the characters and you look at what you're trying to do. So are you going to tell a radicalized, revolutionary story? Are you going to tell this power for the people story? But by doing something like that, you're actually going to walk all over Patty Hearst. You're going to take away from what her story is. And that is the sensationalizing, whatever. That's what the media did to this. They sensationalized, there we go, that's the wording, the case. They didn't look at the people. They didn't look at the people that were involved, or the fact that they, for lack of a better word, all had souls, individualism, identity, that they all were something before they just became letters and names and newsprint. And all Patty Hearst was ever seen as in the first place was just a fucking rich girl, so... The grace of Paul Schrader is him being able to take this situation and to figure out something with his imagination, which is exactly what he did, because you've got the first third of this movie taking place in a closet with a blindfolded lead. So all you have is imagination, the lead's imagination. And the creativity and just the genius behind Paul Schrader, behind a camera and as a director. This, to me, is, I think, one of the greatest examples of his ability to just take a story and tell you the story. So many directors lose that. I think you've got a lot of ambition with taking a story and making it your own and telling the story the way you want to tell the story. And I'm the director. I'm going to do it my way. But sometimes the story just needs to be told. Sometimes the story was written and created well enough, and in this case, a story that's true and so stranger than fiction, the dirty little fingers of somebody that wants to make it their way would have just wasted the whole idea. It would have diminished any of the beauty inside of the story, and despite it being a very cruel and agonizing, political, strenuous, awful story, there is beauty, I think, at the end of the day. And not just in the sake of it being a beautiful film or there being beauty in the film, but really the lesson at the end of the day. Which I'd like to say is fuck the man and don't trust honkies, and I'll tell you that any day of the week. But that's not entirely the lesson. Not entirely the lesson. Because, I can't just push my thoughts on you. And I could. I mean, I have this venue and I have this soapbox, and I totally could. But I want to, I don't know. I want to try and be diplomatic. I know that ship has sailed, but I'm trying. We're trying. Everyone's trying so hard these days. Hey, you know what? Maybe the whole lesson of the coup was the friends we make along the way. Patty Hearst. That's what we're talking about. Patty Hearst. So the movie begins with the dearly departed and beautiful Natasha Richardson as Patty Hearst at campus at UC Berkeley. And the opening narration makes it seem like you're about to go on some feel-good ride where you learn something about yourself at the end of the day. Something in the narration that Patty says in this scene, I think, really carries the momentum and the idea of this movie. She says, "There is little one can do to prepare for the unknown." And, I mean, in a whole, that's all reality is, looking deeply into the unknown. But in the case, what we're presented to in this story, everything is going to be completely unknown to Patty Hearst. And in real life, I don't know. I don't know how much of that is true. And that's not what we're here to discuss. But I just wanted to plant seeds, I guess, in your head. Sowing seeds of doubt. Always have doubt. Shown in a quick flash in the opening credits is Patty's engagement announcement. Just a little clue from Paul Schrader to help fill in some of these gaps of, well, how did they know where she lived? How did she get kidnapped? Like I said, a lot of things had to be condensed to get this movie off the ground, to get the story told in the format that you have. At the very beginning and toward the end, you've got this really sappy, almost Lifetime movie soundtrack, but quickly after that, the movie turns into this aching, hard synth sound, almost like cell doors just being slammed with some of Patty Hearst's actual tapes from the SLA mixed into it, and it just instantly kind of pushes you away from being able to relate to anything. It makes the reality of the movie even stranger and more disassociative, because when the soundtrack begins blaring and booming at you, it's not like music you've really heard. It's not like skinny puppy industrial. It's just very cold. It pushes you away, and I think a lot of the direction, a lot of the point with this in general and some of the situations we're going to get into is to push you away. You're introduced to the SLA with the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, recreated directly from her words, their invasion of her apartment, they beating the living hell out of her fiancé, and her most important thought at this sequence, something that horrifies me when I watch the movie and makes my heart just race a little bit, that she keeps repeating, her only thought inside of her head is, please don't bury me, please don't bury me, please don't bury me, please don't bury me. Something reminiscent of a movie that came out in the same era that obviously was influenced by Patty Hearst, The Candy Snatchers. Hey, that's another movie that you can get right from Vinegar Syndrome, where a heiress is kidnapped and buried alive. Now, of course, that movie came out afterward, but I'm making a fucking reference here. You've got to imagine that fear, and I love that trickling effect that you get from her narration, her inner fear that she's going to be buried alive, and that's what she's most concerned about. Not, my fiancé could be bleeding to death, or they're going to rape and ravage me, please don't bury me, please don't bury me, please don't bury me. And I think that shows something about Patty Hearst. I think that shows something about, especially in the four walls of this movie and the character we're talking about. Because Patty Hearst is real, let me remind you. But Natasha Richardson's Patty Hearst, and this faculty, that's the thought. That's the biggest fear, and that's what we learn about her is her whole entire life, she has been forced to live in a certain mold. In real life, there's information that while the FBI was researching the Hearsts and looking into her life, they had found out that Patty was, before her fiance, dating an African-American and was very, very happy with him. And her mother forced that relationship to end because of social circles and social status. That it wasn't proper for her to be dating an African-American. It wasn't right for her to be dating a man of color. It looked bad on the Hearst family. You don't have that representation in the movie. But again, me giving you that little bit of a fact, you can humanize Patty a little bit more. See, I'm conflicted at this point because I, with intent, have released real information, and now I'm trying to discuss the movie while I keep stressing, it's Patty's story, it's Patty's story, it's Patty's story. And what's really important, though, is what I'm trying to tell you, and what the movie Patty Hearst is from 1988 is her story. Her side of a million-sided story, just like the SLA logo, seven-headed beast. There are so many different heads to this, and unfortunately many of them have been diminished. Most of them have been cut off, and there's no way to really find out the truth. You just have dozens and dozens and dozens of files and news reports that you can dig through if you want to. Obviously I have. We have a very lonely person, somebody that has never really been allowed to be themselves, somebody that has, ooh, boo-hoo, been born into the bourgeoisie, and they have everything. Honestly, what wouldn't a Hearst kid have? And you take it into an era and a time like now, I mean, when Elon Musk's children are 19 years old, will you have a lot of sympathy for them if something bad happened to them? The richest man on the planet's children, a man who does not share his wealth, a man who easily could solve world hunger, a man who could feed and clothe the poor, a man who could, with his wealth, change our entire existence as humans living together in harmony, but instead is trying to throw coups in Venezuela so he can get fucking lithium. Would you feel sympathy? That's kind of what immediately was the news. Nobody really had sympathy for Patty. Nobody really cared, oh, millionaire's daughter gets kidnapped, and the whole point was for the SLA to get their two soldiers back, which was completely laughed at. Nobody's going to take that seriously, and they're treated as terrorists at this point. So Patty, at this point, is pretty fucked. The sole reason the SLA has kidnapped her is now completely meaningless. This is where we start getting a look at our cast of characters, and we get to see the people behind the masks. Sin Q is played by the incredible Ving Rhames. William Forsythe is Tico. And both of these play off each other really wonderfully, and it's kind of neat. Neither of them really share a lot of dialogue. They share a lot of screen time with each other, but it's almost the opposition of their performances, that Ving Rhames is dominating the screen. He is not shown to be quite as articulate as Sin Q truly was, but he radiates power. He radiates being the leader, as to where William Forsythe's Tico is just a very snivelingly bored suburbanite who went out and wanted to do some wild cowboy shit. The SLA decides at this point that, all right, you're not going to free our two comrades, so this is what you've got to do. We want you to allot $70 to each family member so they can have food. We want to start a food program, and we want to feed and clothe the poor. The Hearsts immediately, we can't do that. But they countered, and the counter wasn't, a horrible idea. What's not completely shown and allowed for you to see in the movie is the SLA's food idea, and this is where I had referenced earlier that Huey Newton of the Black Panthers himself had even written an open letter in regards to the food program, and the means in which the SLA was operating under they didn't completely agree with, but they agreed with their point, and they agreed with what their entire message was: feed and clothe the poor. This, in real life, went fairly well. There were 4 occasions of this, and one of which turned into a riot, one of which did not work out, and it was instigated by the police. This is what made news. This is what was shown. It wasn't the fact that there were boxes upon boxes of food with the SLA stamp being sent out to people. And everyone had sympathy at this point, but there are many occasions, and even shown in the movie, a news report of somebody saying, "I feel bad for that girl, but my kids have to eat." Something that isn't really considered. Something that isn't taken into full acknowledgement by the people of power, that yes, there are people without food. Right now in the United States of America, there are people without food, as there were in 1974. The government sends $600 out, and it's like Arrested Development. How much is a banana?
Don't you judge me. You're the selfish one. You're the one who charged his own brother for a Bluth frozen banana. I mean, it's 1 banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
You've never actually set foot in a supermarket, have you?
I don't have time.
Well, like $400? Here, take 600. You'll be fine. You're given a brief glimpse at the chaos that pursues on the failed attempt at the food delivery system. And again, it's all through Patty's perspective. She's still in the closet every waking day of her life. Now, the SLA is treating her to the Geneva Convention Accords of having a prisoner. She's being fed. She's being bathed. And throughout this, she starts to, I wouldn't say become close or have a kinship, but she begins to associate. She begins to learn the identity of those around her and how to become accustomed to being stuck with the SLA while living in this closet. And the closet shots are some of the most articulate and beautiful of the movie. And like I said, it's a third of the movie, but the way it was handled is just astonishing. You've got an amazing use of light. A set is built, and Patty is obviously in this closet inside of this set, and everything are these low shots of these awful, huge, almost Greek-like gods yelling at her from this opening, which is the closet door, and just stark, beautiful light shining behind her. And in the early parts of the movie, while Sin-Q rants and raves about America, the lighting is almost reminiscent of being in a cell, and I feel that you get this feeling that not only is Patty being kidnapped, not only is Patty being held against her will, but everyone truly is. Everyone involved in this story is truly being held against their will by the fascist concepts, by the constraints of America. You see Sin-Q articulately arguing and yelling his point while cast in this light, like cell bars are just surrounding him completely and everyone else, because even in their own thoughts, they are in jail. Even in their own thoughts, they have imposed themselves into a society that can't see outward, and they themselves are even guilty of xenophobia. The thing is, no matter what, every side always meets in the middle. The far right and the far left will meet in the middle, and they do all the time. Patty is a prisoner of the SLA, and the SLA is a prisoner of society. But aren't we all? At this point, I think you are 100% allowed to acknowledge that this film is Paul's interpretation of Patty's story, and almost to the word, and it's just that. One side of a story. Keep repeating ourselves. One side of a story that we really will never know all the other sides to. It's not twisted and it's not distorted. Paul simply took Patty's side and visualized it in an attempt to allow what Patty had to say to be visualized, maybe to be taken differently and not judged. Because I've said this also several times, all the public saw Patty as was a rich girl. And by the public, I mean the left with no leader, the empty liberal left that has 1,000 voices that has nothing to say. Does that make sense? And by no means am I trying to assert myself as right-wing or on the right. I'm looking at every situation and the pretense of what we're discussing. Major events are just mentioned briefly because it's through Patty's perspective. She's still just stuck in the closet. She's let out every now and again, and she gets these brief glimpses of what's going on. She hears what's going on, but her entire reality is with the SLA. Everything she learns and is told is being told and taught to her by the SLA, so she has no true opinion or thought process of her own at this point. Something major like the food program, it's just not covered, for one, because it had to be condensed, and two, Patty just really wasn't privy to it. But in reality, I think Patty's father's refusal for the food program is something that helped radicalize her and helped her realize they don't actually care. At this point in the film, our cast of characters begin removing their masks. Everyone has tried to hide themselves from Patty, and they begin becoming more comfortable.
I'm kept blindfolded, usually, so that I can't identify anyone. My hands are often tied, but they're not. And I'm not gagged or anything. I'm comfortable. And I think you can tell that I'm not really terrified or anything. No, I'm okay.
She starts to socialize more. She starts learning more about the sexual nature of this, because it's very camaraderie. Yes, that's the word I'm going to use. It's very camaraderie to, relieve your comrade, and everyone fucks. They don't have time for sex because they're so worried about politics, but no, everybody fucks, and this is, I guess, where we need to apply a trigger warning to the show, because there are 2 rapes of Patty Hearst that are shown in this film. You've got the physical rape of Patty Hearst, and then you've got the philosophical rape of Patty Hearst. Her entire image, her persona, her character, her life was just thrown onto television, was just exposed by the media, and for the most part, it was all wrong. Most of the time, it was this inept fantasizing about who or what Patty Hearst actually was, and then when she revealed herself and when she was finally there for everyone to hear, it was almost like a burden. It was a problem. They enjoyed the fantasy and the idea of Patty Hearst far more than who she actually was or is. But as the masks come off, what you are given is an example of the very small bit of character development we have. We are allowed to get to know by face and by attitude who some of these SLA members are. You get very brief depictions of Gabby and Zoya, Galena. Despite being a very important member to the SLA, Cujo is really shown sparingly throughout this film. There are important moments that need to take note of, and we'll get there in just a minute. But the characterization of these people isn't entirely important, and again, if there was more time, if this could have been an 8-hour miniseries, every single person deserves to have their respects shown, and it's something that Schrader would have loved to have taken this and done it from the idea of Sin Q. But again, the subject matter was specifically the story of Patty Hearst. But so many of these stories need to be told, and I was raving earlier about the genius of Sin Q. This is really where that starts to come into play, because even Patty, for the longest time, was under the belief that the SLA was in the thousands. There were massive cells. There were people all over the place. There weren't. There were like 9 of them. It was just how it was handled. They had these communiques, similar to what Che Guevara and Castro would do, where they would record messages and send them out to the major news sources.
To those who would bear the hopes and future of our people, let the voice of their guns express the words of freedom. Greetings to the people, comrades, sisters, and brothers. General Field Marshal Sin speaking. The Symbionese World Council, the Court of the People, has just finished hearing tapes and reading some of the news reports and statements made by the Hearst family concerning the arrest of Patricia Campbell Hearst. In the court's second tape by Patricia, it was stated that any good faith gesture on the part of the Hearst empire would be basically okay. We, however, understand that Patricia wants to come home as soon as possible, and that this statement could be misinterpreted as meaning that an untrue gesture of good faith and regret would be accepted by the people. And this is not the case. Therefore, at the end of that tape statement by Patricia, I myself, by the direction of the court, stated the feelings of the court and thereby clarified the request of the people. That statement reads as follows. We wish to clarify what your daughter has said about our request for a good faith gesture on your part. The people are awaiting your gesture. You may rest assured that we are quite able to assess the extent of your sincerity in this matter, and we will accept a sincere effort on your part. We are quite able and aware of the extent of your capabilities, as we are also aware of the needs of the people. The Hearst Empire has attempted to mislead the people and to deceive them by claiming to put forth a good faith gesture of $2 million. This amount is not at all a good faith gesture, but rather is an act of throwing a few crumbs to the people, forcing them to fight over it amongst themselves.
But after kidnapping Patty Hearst, Symbionese managed literally to dominate the control of the media. All over the world, he had managed to strike fear into people who listened to him, and many of these people are people that look at even the message of Bernie Sanders and go, that's fucking communism, man. Ain't no communist shit for me. My granddaddy didn't fight no communists for, well, maybe he didn't fight the communists, or maybe he fought the, you know what? I don't care. Granddaddy didn't fight no foreigner for communists. You get the point, right? I don't have to keep doing the impersonation. It's just this blind fear. And everyone is guilty of xenophobia in this universe, in this film. Every single character is guilty of sexism and going against what they praise to be their ultimate truth. And you're shown through Natasha Richardson's Patty Hearst just that everything is bullshit. Ideology, trust, love, the sanctimonious camaraderie, we all have to get each other off bullshit. It's just rape. It's a rape of identity. It's a physical rape. Everything is one massive circle jerk. From her persona being just completely destroyed by the media to herself being destroyed by the SLA. Communications from the SLA were being published everywhere. They were being handed out all through California. They were all over the world, uncensored by the media. These messages recorded by the Army were being played on morning news, 6 o'clock, midnight. The whole world was clinging to what was happening, all while at the same time judging Patty Hearst as some rich bitch. There were sympathetic people. There were people in the streets with their hand up. There were radicals that cared about the movement. There were people that wanted the poor to be clothed. They wanted people to have food. Their voices clearly weren't heard over the marching machine of fascism, but that tends to happen. As Patty begins to be indoctrinated and radicalized to the SLA way and the masks are taken off, her blindfold is eventually removed. And this is where something very important happens. Symbionese tells Patty that the FBI killing her would be like a coup for fascist repression. And he's 100% right. Ironically, he gives her a gas mask, but in the end, she doesn't have to use it, much to the dismay and sadness of the FBI, who didn't get their kill. He tells her if the FBI comes in looking for them, looking to swarm, they're going to shoot her. They're going to end her, and it's going to be for a point. He gives her the option to fight or die, to join or go home. Now, you're given a very heavy subtlety that it's a threat on her life. Again, this is the perspective and point of view of Patty Hearst. So what we're allowed to see is in that realm. Is that the truth? I can't comment. But allowing the facts to wash over you and looking at this from every single angle, I think the radicalization of Patty Hearst started a little bit before this. And in my humble opinion, I think it really was a bit of a punk rock rebellion for her. It was a bit of a fuck you, mom and dad. Now, we'll try and keep these opinions to ourselves here because they don't fit the narrative that Paul Schrader is showing us. They don't fit into Patty Hearst's story. They fit into the actual story. They fit into the whole story. They are all pieces of a puzzle, but unfortunately, this is a puzzle that, has been shipped around and sent to 2 or 3 Goodwills, and most of the pieces are gone. The tape that kept the box closed is broken off, and there's pieces from other puzzles now shoved inside of it. You try to put it together, and one corner is Waco, and the other side's Ruby Ridge, and a little bit of the Unabombers up in there on one side. It gets all over the place. But ultimately, Patty chooses to fight, whether she was persuaded with the idea of death or not. She chooses to fight and join the SLA. And immediately her messages home go from, I'm okay, mom and dad, to, y'all some fucking pigs. Wow, you aren't even going to help the people, and you're not going to help me. Fuck you guys, I am for the SLA.
Greetings to the people. This is Tanya. On April 15th, my comrades and I expropriated $10,660.02 from the Sunset branch of the Hibernia Bank. Casualties could have been avoided had the persons involved cooperated with the People's Forces and kept out of the way until after our departure. I was positioned so that I could hold customers and bank personnel who were on the floor. My gun was loaded, and at no time did any of my comrades intentionally point their guns at me. Careful examination of the photographs, which were published, clearly shows this is true. Our action of April 15th forced the corporate state to help finance the revolution. As for my ex-fiancé, I don't care if I ever see him again. During the last few months, Stephen has shown himself to be a sexist, ageist pig. Not that this was a sudden change from the way he always was.
Overnight. Boo. Radical Patty. Cowboy Patty. And that's really what's happening here, is some cowboy shit. Patty tells us something, again, very important. Don't examine your feelings. They're no help at all. And the rape of Patty at this point is now shown to be a good comrade. It's really what these people believe for their abuse, for their hunger and craving of power. It's being a good comrade. It, regardless, is rape. And I said this at the beginning of the show, but where we're at in this story, just to remind you how similar politics were in 1974 as they are now. 2 weeks after Patty was kidnapped, President Nixon was brought up to be impeached for Watergate. Now, he stepped down as President of the United States of America, allowing Gerald Ford to become president, and he eventually was pardoned. But can you see how history continuously begins to repeat itself? And it's all because, truly, we have forgotten and allowed ourselves to forget these things, or we've allowed the new modern enemy to overpower what the other one was, to where we look back on it and say, they weren't even that bad. Reagan wasn't that bad, starting Mujahideen and all that, and selling weapons and strains of the plague to Saddam Hussein. It wasn't that bad. It's not like Donald Trump. No, that's the fucking problem. They're all bad. It's a history of bad men, in fact. Every single goddamn one of them. I don't care how nice Jimmy Carter seems to be. Look at him. He's 95 years old, had brain cancer, he's still building houses. He's helping the people. Motherfucker was still the president of the United States of America, and I really don't feel that there's anything more corrupt at this point than the United States of America's president. And please, I'd love to be proven wrong, but history is far older than me, and in the many, many years of the esteemed title of the United States president, when have we had the proof or any acknowledgement that they actually are for us outside of being for a corporation? Corporate fascist America, whether it's guns, germs, or steel, it's always corporate when it comes to America. This leads us to the most heartbreaking scene of the movie, and I think the powerhouse performance that it capitalizes the art and the beauty of this film. Natasha Richardson's Patricia Hearst is still in the closet. They have removed her blindfold. They are allowing her to become a member of the SLA. She's becoming a good comrade, helping everyone's camaraderie needs, and she breaks down in the closet and just snaps upward and begins spouting out all these things that they say to her, oh, you're so tight, you're a cum dumpster, what can we do to her next? Oh, I've got an idea. It's heartbreaking and it's disgusting, even recanting it and quoting the dialogue. It's uncomfortable, and it's again the striving point with what the representation on screen is. I'm going to say it again, god damn it. This is Patty's story. And I have mixed in so many other universes and still struggle to keep this thin line of what is reality in the idea of Patty's story and what is reality in our world. You dig? You following? This is a difficult episode. I know. This is why I immediately regretted coming up with the idea. Patty repeats all of these things, all of these awful things that are said to her while she's being raped and abused. And this lets the reality of the situation really sink in. This really allows you to know where we're at, because we are prisoner with Patty. We are in that room with her. Our POV is hers. Everything that we are allowed to know, all the knowledge and the few glimpses of these characters is from Patty's perspective and Patty's point of view. So we have been abused just as much as she has. And a lot of the lighting, a lot of the music cues, a lot of the set design, I think, really is made to encapsulate that and to force you into feeling secluded and to abuse you to an extent, to really make you feel alone, lonely, to make you feel hopeless. And that is a really powerful point of watching this movie, is being able to connect and to feel Patty's just hopelessness. What option does she have? Really, what can she do? I mean, it's constantly pointed out she could have just walked away, right? She's been given a lot of opportunities to just walk away. What you got to look at is just the destitute loneliness and the barren hopelessness she's feeling. She feels like her parents have given up on her. Her father isn't going to step up. They're not going to come in and save the day and make everything okay. She has no option, and where else would she go? She's already been made to feel completely worthless, being constantly raped and abused by these people. I mean, what option does she feel that she has? And this is where things start getting really interesting for Patty. What exactly is a revolution? A revolution is an act of violence where one class overthrows the other. This is something the character Tico, played by William Forsythe, says as we move into the next act of the movie, something that echoes in my mind. You know, most people, especially in the 60s and 70s and the freak power movement, the kids that were out there fighting for equality, some of these kids that became the SLA, the kids that went to Woodstock, marched in the streets. After the murder at Kent State, these people challenged the police. They challenged authority. They thought of themselves, for the most part, as patriots. That they were standing for the American way, that they were standing for what we truly are, a country of equality, a country of beauty, a country of peace. Things that, just like the SLA, sound really great on paper, but nobody's ever been able to actually prove. Just like fucking communism on paper. It sounds great. Put it into theory and, look at Stalinism, and we can see what happened in Russia in the 50s. Doesn't always work out that well. But these white trash bastards, adorned with Camp Auschwitz t-shirts and swastikas, that storm Washington, D.C., they too think of themselves as patriots. And this is really where we got ourselves into a good old-fashioned problem here. And I mentioned this a while back. The sides always meet in the middle, and it's not just with extremities. Everything eventually meets in the middle. It's just existence. It's life. It's just how things happen. Everything truly does meet in the middle. Where else can concept go? The farther extreme you go, the more each side begins to meet in the middle and become more and more the same. It doesn't matter how far left or right one thing is, but when you really drive extremities into it and start practicing acts of violence, when you start destroying and when you start striking fear, what else do you have to call it but terrorism? But terrorism is always under the guise of patriotism, is it not? I mean, the extremists in the Middle East, Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, aren't they in their own right doing the right thing? You know, don't they feel that? Don't they think, well, we're doing the right thing. Everyone else is against us. That's extremity in any generalization. You just think you're doing the right thing. That also is being brainwashed. Being told something so many times, you just suddenly think it's true and you have to act on it because it's patriotism. Ooh, brainwashing. Talking about Patty Hearst and brainwashing comes up, get out of town. Get out of town! Cannot believe it that we've gotten to that point. Finally. We're not even actually there yet. I'm sorry. Whether or not she's indoctrinated, or she's acting, buying into the hype to save herself, or on a vacation away from her parents enacting some cowboy punk rock fantasy, Patty Hearst is now a member of the SLA. She chose to join instead of go home, which, I mean, you can just go home, you can just walk away. Like the Lord Humongous says, can you really? Is that just a euphemism for dying? Because it kind of sounds like it.
There has been too much violence, too much pain. None here without sin. But I have an honorable compromise. Just walk away. Give me the pump, the oil, the gasoline, and the whole compound, and I spare you lives. Just walk away. I will give you safe passage in the wasteland. Just walk away, and there will be an end to the horror.
Patty is given the war name Tanya, after the revolutionary who fought with Che Guevara in Bolivia. Her mask is removed and her vision is restored as she is now an urban guerrilla, one of the SLA, reborn unto them. Reborn unto them through brainwashing, torture, rape. At this point, Patty has to get fit, and she is brought into a hard exercise cycle with the rest of the family members. I hate using that term because this ain't no fucking Manson family shit. This is not a bunch of people brought into this situation, hyped out on LSD, jerking themselves off over some revolution that may or may not happen in the middle of the desert. There are strengths to this. There are realizations to the SLA and all extremist groups that unfortunately at some point they had a valid beginning. I'm not saying the Nazi Party had a valid beginning. I'm not saying Al-Qaeda had a valid beginning. But at some point, someone's thoughts had some fucking validity. I mean, nothing else could be started if it didn't. Other people wouldn't be able to believe in this and join forces if there wasn't even a frame or tiny glimpse of validity to whatever thought they were having that somebody else shared. Now, charisma does play a big part into this, but Sin-Q wasn't that charismatic to form this. There are other forces at hand. There are other hands in the pie, I guess you could say. The mastery of Sin-Q, as I pointed out, was the ability to convince the entire world that this song and dance was legion, for they are many, and it wasn't. It was a bunch of honkies. It was a bunch of bored suburbanites and one man against the world, as he thought. And of course, poor Patty fucking Hearst. Patty soon learns that there are no other units of the SLA. She learns that everyone she's been introduced to, Sin-Q and company, is it. That's them. And it's a devastating sequence because you can see the pain on her face. You can see the utter dismay. Natasha Richardson, God rest her soul. I mean, her entire family was talented, but this is an overall terrific performance. I really feel going back and forth with this movie, there's times where I just kind of forget it's an actress. I kind of lose, and it's not like she exactly looks like Patty Hearst, but it's the mannerisms, it's the voice, it's the way that she's managed to control this pain and allow you to see it on screen. Some of the casting is fucking beautiful, though. William Forsythe as Tico is spot on. Most of everyone. Ving Rhames is a bit big for Sin-Q, but hey, we're just breaking eggs here. This isn't it. We're just wasting time. And we don't need filler on this episode. Holy shit. Patty is betrayed and she's shocked, but honestly, more than anything else, she's feeling lost and hopeless. In the narrative that Paul Schrader is telling us, she is lost and hopeless. You see, Patty's story, her side of her story, her side of the story, it's a little bit more fascinating than a rich kid who just decided to leave home and become an urban guerrilla. At least it makes for a more interesting movie to sell. We're told in Patty's narration, think before you speak. Crush any part of you that is Patty Hearst. Patty tells herself this to adjust to becoming this new guerrilla, to knowing that people like Yolanda and Tico don't want her around, that they want her dead, knowing that the general public doesn't really care, that they just kind of take her as, bad things happen to the rich girl. As Patty begins to become part of the SLA, we learn immediately that they're going to rob a bakery. And it's kind of a lighthearted comedy scene where she's confused. Why would you rob a bakery? It's just code word for banks, because that's where the bread is. And you've got, following this, one of the best scenes with William Forsythe. What you've got with Tico is a man who clearly never had an identity of his own, was never happy with being who he was. And he's in blackface and has this afro wig on and is going, and this is how they move. This is how the SLA moves throughout the night and finds different safe houses as all of them cover themselves in blackface and try and fit in and move along with Sin-Q. And he's in the bathroom he's got this whole accent going on and he's trying to put on his best, inner black guy performance. And obviously it's something that under other pretenses could be taken incredibly seriously and could be very offensive to people. But in the format and what you're shown in this movie and the SLA's attempt to survive and move, it's a weird lighthearted comedy. It's not lighthearted comedy. Let's rephrase that. But you've got these weird glimpses into the personality faults and the defects of who some of these SLA members are and some of their quirks and some of the problems with them, and you can get an allowance because of Paul Schrader and his retelling of Patty Hearst's story of how they even came to be in this part, or how they even came to this being a part of their lives. And like I pointed out with Tico, a complete lack of his own identity. At this point in the movie, the Symbionese Liberation Army love triangle is more intense than Fleetwood Mac's at the time of Rumors being recorded. Of course, it's a love triangle for everybody but Patty, who is just being raped. It doesn't matter, even if at the time it was consensual. She's still a kidnapped victim. There is no consensual nature about this. Why the SLA is referred to as a terrorist organization begins to bloom at this point in the story as they come up with the idea that bank robbery is completely necessary, and this is what they must do to survive. One of the most infamous moments of the Patty Hearst case. Forever on film. The SLA robs this bank, man, and Patty is on the forefront. She even has a speech that she has to memorize. Of course, in the movie, she fucks it up, but it becomes a moment of pure bliss for everyone. It becomes a moment where they're all finally recognized, where they have capitalized on their entire message. Every single media source is publishing them. Every single media source has gotten fanatical with Patty Hearst is a guerrilla. Patty Hearst has joined them.
These women emerged as faces when, with Patricia Hearst, they charged into a San Francisco bank armed with carbines and pistols. Within 2 minutes, the women and a male accomplice took $10,000, shooting 2 bystanders during their escape. Who are the women in the SLA? According to the FBI, they are Nancy Lane Perry, 26, wanted for bank robbery and arson. Ms. Moon Soltzick, 24, wanted for bank robbery, suspected of kidnapping. Camilla Hall, 29, wanted for bank robbery.
Tanya,
wanted on state charges of fraudulent identification. Angela Atwood, also wanted on state charges of fraudulent identification. And finally, Patricia Hearst, 20, wanted as a material witness to a bank robbery. There are other women suspected of being members of the SLA, but so far they are known only by code names. The FBI doesn't know why the women are making themselves so visible, or why there is so much more known about them than the men. The answers to these questions will depend upon the women being found, and so far no one has had much success at that. Gail Christian, NBC News, at the Federal Building in San Francisco.
We're given the implication that Patty was led. We're given the implication that she was coerced into this, and definitely not acting on her own. In real life, lip readers were hired, and the story is a little bit different. What we're shown in Schrader's retelling of Patty Hearst's story is a very timid and meek person who was afraid, was under guns, was going to be hurt if they didn't commit to this. In reality, it seems like Patty was yelling, "Get on the floor, motherfucker, and put your face down." Again, I'm not trying to dissuade the narrative. I'm not trying to push away from Patty's narrative. I'm just pointing little directions every now and again that are available. They're factoids of truth. Things that just pepper this story a little bit, make it a little spicy, give it a little bit more of an interesting kick. I mean, truth be told, when the truth is told, isn't it a little bit more interesting? Or at least being able to think for yourself. That's interesting too. A thing to take note of is when you watch the actual footage of the bank robbery, Patty doesn't jump. She's not afraid when shots are fired off. Those 2 shots that are fired off took the life of civilians. 2 human beings died in this attack. This appropriation, as the SLA worded it, of funds. They were appropriating funds back to themselves from the United States government, which was stolen from them. So even in Sin Q's eyes, this was not a bank robbery. But this puts the SLA onto the mouth of every single person in the United States because Patty took part in this. Patty freely, with her messages and communiques being sent rapidly from the SLA to the media, sensationalized this, and it went from, fuck Patty, she's just a spoiled rich girl, to power to Patty. And just like that, overnight, she became a name for the people.
Greetings to the people. This is Tanya.
Tanya. Not Patty. Because at this point, Patty's dead, and she has taken on not just the war name, but the persona of Tanya. She's Tanya too. Tanya to Cujo's Che Guevara. Patty is shown to be indifferent after the bank robbery. It's made to seem like she's just happy to be accepted, to be no longer abused, to be considered an anything. And I think that's a striving point and something that needs to be acknowledged throughout the entirety of this movie is Patty's struggle to just be accepted as anything other than what she is. And everyone's involvement. No one wanting to be who they are, the lack of identity that I brought up with Tico. At this point, we get a very brief look into Willie Wolf, and what we're shown is just a typical jaded youth, which honestly, it's really what they all were. But Cujo had more to do with this than just some dreamy guerrilla fantasy that he was living. This wasn't just a Che fetish. There wouldn't have been an SLA without him. And Patty had some form of relationship with him, whether it was forced or coerced or not. Cujo and Patty Hearst became intimate in some facet. He gave her an Olmec monkey charm that even when arrested after his death, she still managed to keep. This was used against her in court as to why would you keep something that was given to you by your rapist? A good question, but something that ultimately doesn't matter, the choices that Patty made, or if she was truly brainwashed, something you wouldn't even really need to question. Of course she would keep it if she was brainwashed, which at this point of the narrative is being introduced. It wasn't solely something used later on for Patty in her court case. The idea of Stockholm Syndrome was still shockingly new at this point, but it's something that begins to pop up in the narrative here. Patty's parents, especially her mother, and their attorneys began using this. She's brainwashed. She's not in her right mind. She's been kidnapped. Even then Governor Ronald Reagan came forward and said all of the things that Patty Hearst may or may not have done have been done and committed while she was kidnapped. So it's got to be under the guise that she was kidnapped. The media itself began to sensationalize the idea that she had been brainwashed long beforehand, to the extent that she releases a communique stating, "It's laughable to even consider that I've been brainwashed. I am doing this all on my own accord," something that would really come back to bite her in the ass later on.
For those people who still believe that I'm brainwashed or dead, I see no reason to further defend my position. Consciousness is terrifying to the ruling class, and they will do anything to discredit people who have realized that the only alternative to freedom is death, and that the only way we can free ourselves of this fascist dictatorship is by fighting, not with words, but with guns. I am a soldier in the people's army. Patria o muerte, venceremos. I renounced my class privilege when Sin and Cujo gave me the name Tanya. While I have no death wish, I have never been afraid of death. For this reason, the brainwashed duress theory of the pig Hearst has always amused me. Life is very precious to me, but I have no delusions that going to prison will keep me alive. And I would never choose to live the rest of my life surrounded by pigs like the Hearsts. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people.
You're informed, and it's made regular that when the pigs come in, we fight. We fight, and we die. No jail. Surrender is never an option, and surrender was never an option for the SLA. They hoped of being killed in this firefight, this massive war against the pigs, because it would rise them up to the idea of martyrdom, that the people on the street would look at the SLA and see that they were wasted by these pigs, and that we need to stand up and we need to fight and we need to do it for the justice of the people to destroy the fascism that is feeding upon all of us. They were ready to die. They were ready even after the bank robbery to go down, and that's what everyone was expecting. It's fucking Patty Hearst. It's a Hearst. They kidnapped one, and the FBI's not kicking down the doors? The CIA, nobody? ATF, well, I don't even think they were around at the time period. But regardless, isn't that fucky? Isn't something fishy about this? But everyone was ready. The SLA continuously moves from safe house to safe house in an attempt to cover and hide their own tracks. At this point, Sin-Q decides that they need to go door to door. They need to start going to the people. They see the support. They can even on the news hear people. Power to SLA. Probably the worst idea that could happen. Hey, we're being hunted by the FBI. We kidnapped Patty Hearst. Let's just go door to door. But it shows to warrant something. What we are allowed to see is that some black Muslims step up and begin supporting the SLA. And the characterization, there are no names that were given in this film, is that these guys are NOI, another fun acronym, the Nation of Islam. And in the Nation of Islam, it was purported in the 60s to the 90s that they had a hit squad and that these gentlemen would dress in a very specific way. And the show The Wire, you have a infamous character that dresses in the same purported style, a suit with a bow tie. These, and I'm not saying it's what's shown in the movie, but this imagery is what is purported to be the NOI hit squad, and that these people have taken up with the SLA and taken up for their plight. In real life, there were many other organizations outside of that, and I'm not going to, accuse or say NOI had any involvement with them, but the Black Guerrilla family, many other left-wing radical organizations, many other people in the Pan-African movement were all giving attention and sympathy to the SLA. Despite how heinous their shotgun murder even before the Hearst kidnapping was. The SLA was not pushed away, though. People wanted food and freedom. People in these neighborhoods wanted food and freedom. They believed the offer. Anyone was willing to work in a situation that could possibly bring this idea to fruition of, power to the people. It didn't really matter. It didn't really matter how awful the mannerisms of making these things happen were. Even the children scream, "Kill some pigs," from the mouth of babes, right? But at this point, with the help of the NOI, the SLA moves to LA, the City of Angels, which proves to be incredibly deadly for them. At this point of the film, Sin-Q is made to be a raving, self-obsessed egomaniac. But he literally tricked the FBI into believing the SLA was fucking Legion. He had their messages uncensored on every TV in the world. Schrader makes him out to be, via Patty's words, as a less than impressive hood. But the truth of the reality and the things that really happened, the things that we have proof that happened, show Sin-Q to be an urban guerrilla genius. He scared the entire world. But you know what? So did Patty. If Patty had a lucky star, now would be her time to thank it. She goes on an outing with Tico and Yolanda, an outing that proves to be very, very important. Hello there. This is Harry Scott Sullivan, your host, which I probably didn't need to say because you've been listening to my voice for the last 2 hours or so, and you're probably pretty familiar with it. But I thought this was an opportune time to pop in and let you know what you have been listening to is a re-release. Originally broadcast January 15th, 2021, Patty Hearst in my own words. What you are hearing was a 3-part series that was released between January 15th and January 22nd, 2021. And for the most part, nothing really has changed from the original broadcast. There's been a few sound tweaks here and there. Some things have been lowered. And some things are louder. But I wanted to re-present this broadcast in its original format. I didn't want anything to change. I think you may be able to tell that this is a little bit older, but regardless, the politics are all just the same. All my thoughts are just as important as they were then in 2021 as they are now. This episode of Death by DVD, next to the Christine Chubbuck one, has gotten me more hate mail than any one beforehand, and I am proud of that. I will say I'm proud of this episode, and I hope you have been enjoying what you're listening to. And with that, we can transition into the third and final part of Patty Hearst, America's Princess.
5 suspected members of the Symbionese Liberation Army are dead following the bloodiest and most massive gun battle in the history of Los Angeles. Hundreds of police and FBI agents surrounded this small house on East 54th Street in the south-central area of the city. Shortly before 6 p.m., gunfire erupted. For more than an hour, thousands of rounds of automatic weapons and small gunfire were exchanged between police and the suspects inside the house. 6 tear gas assaults were made in an attempt to flush out the fugitives, until finally, houses on either side, as well as the pink wood and stucco fortress, caught fire. A fire believed to have been started by an exploding gas canister.
And now this is the finale. This is the end. Something new here. Wanted to experiment with new content and see how that went, which is exciting. It's always fun seeing people's reactions to something new, but all good things have to come to an end. And most of the time, when the U.S. government is involved in it, it's a fiery end. Why does it always have to end in fire? But before we begin the beginning of the end, I do have something that I wanted to talk about, something that was troubling me, I wanted to bring up before we stutter around for a little while and figure out where we left off and jump back into this whole thing. While researching Patty Hearst, the Symbionese Liberation Army, the news coverage of what happened, the kidnapping, the bank robberies, I found it nearly impossible to find any news about the SLA food drives, the 2 successful food drives and the one wrecked by then Governor Reagan and the police, the Hearst refusal to the SLA's original money plea for the food drive. All you can really find is doom and gloom and brainwashing and kidnapping. Like a very specific narrative is being adhered to. Adhorned to? That doesn't sound right. Like being adhorned to, no, that can't be it. Whatever. Like a very specific narrative is being followed for the sake of history, and all other aspects apparently don't matter, which is very strange. I think it's troubling and, despairing at least. But it happens constantly, like how they teach in schools now that the very first Thanksgiving, the Native Americans, they all hung out with the Pilgrims and they had cake and punch and everything was really great and everyone had a really nice time and, they all went on each other's Christmas card lists after that and it just worked out really well. Yeah, it's not entirely how things went. Nice story, though, I guess. And that's what we have here with Patty. A nice story, I guess. When all the other sides are lost or forgotten and we are forced to accept one narrative, is it someone forcing lies on us, or are we lying to ourselves? Or is it just being lazy and not journeying for the truth? Are we, as a people, just complacent being told something as a truth and not questioning it anymore? I don't know. Just something I wanted to touch upon before we get back into the Schrader film and the ending of this dang old extravaganza. Now, finding SLA communiques, their writing, pamphlets, so on and so forth, that's not very hard. A quick Google search, in fact, of the words Symbionese Liberation Army communiques will do you well. I strongly suggest researching everything for yourself. Sure, for entertainment purposes, it's great hearing someone talk about it. Infliction, emotion, all that stuff really makes a difference when, you're hearing something, when you're learning something auditory. But always question everything. Authority, the facts, fuck it, question everything. It's the best way to learn, by questioning everything. Question reality if you have to. Question everything. And this isn't just pertaining to Patty Hearst and the Symbionese Liberation Army, but life in general. All right, anyhow. What was going on? So the SLA goes to LA with the help of the NOI. That's a lot of acronyms. Let's go back again. Let's do that one more time. The Symbionese Liberation Army goes to Los Angeles with the help of the Nation of Islam. Patty, Tico, and Yolanda go on a little ride, and that's it. That's where we are. Okay. Ahem. Let's get this party started. The beginning of the end and the finale to Patty Hearst. In my own words. Haha, I caught it that time. Part 3. At a sporting goods store in Inglewood called Mel's, Tico decides that he is going to steal some socks. He's caught by security. He's going to be arrested. And Patty's out in the car. She's in a VW van with the keys and an assault rifle. She could have driven away. She could have escaped the entire situation. But she opens fire, saving the day. Yolanda and Tico get back to the van and they drive off. They end up finding a hotel room near Disneyland to stay the night, where they find on TV some absolutely devastating live news. The FBI has found the SLA. At a house on 54th Street in LA, devastation has widespread begun.
This is Channel 7's Eyewitness News with Judd Hambrick, John Schubeck, and the Eyewitness News team.
Good evening. I'm Judd Hambrick. Here's what's happening at 11 o'clock. The gunfire has stopped and the flames are out, but a big question mark still hangs over south central Los Angeles at this very moment. A question as large and perhaps as tragic as any on the West Coast in the last 103 days. Is the body of Patty Hearst among the 5 found early tonight in a shot-up, burned-out home on 54th and Compton Avenues? A home that went up in unchecked flames as the climax of a shootout in which Los Angeles police fired more ammunition than they ever had fired before in a single law enforcement assault. Just who are the 5 persons killed? That still is not known. If any of them have been identified, it's not been officially disclosed. At Hillsborough, California, the Randolph Hearst family has apparently given in to the inevitable fear. A family spokesman said tonight that the feeling inside the Hearst home is that it's all over for Patty.
Yet despite that atmosphere, the family spokesman added that the Hearsts still are clinging to some hope that their daughter was somewhere else, not in a stucco house at Compton and 54th Avenue here in Los Angeles.
Now, we knew the SLA wasn't going to give themselves up, and they were waiting for an opportunity to fight the power and to fuck the man. But we don't know who fired first. We don't know what started this. What we know is that day, the FBI burned down a house filled with people. And they came there to do that. The FBI didn't even try to take them alive. They weren't there for that. Yolanda, Tico, and Tanya watched the SLA die on television. They watched their comrades die. Now for Patty, it might even be bittersweet. But what we're shown on screen is an absolute breakdown. We're shown horror. And we're shown the reality. This was not hidden by Patty or Paul. They didn't try to take them alive. The FBI came in there, and they burned them down. And no one survived. Patty got to watch what would have been her death. The police and reporters said Patty was in there. And it's just like Sin-Q told her. If they had come in and they had taken her out, it would have been the perfect tool for fascist repression. We killed the rich girl turned gorilla, Patty Hearst. I mean, you guys have seen Escape from LA. Even John Carpenter tried to turn his hand at the story of Patty Hearst, but he failed miserably. All he did was help perpetuate the bullshit more and more and more. Good casting, though. And one would think it's all over. I mean, this is the end. The leader is gone. The army is gone. The FBI burned him down like it was Waco. That hadn't even happened yet. Ruby Ridge hasn't even happened yet. History keeps managing to repeat itself, and no one notices. Isn't it wild? These actions unfortunately leave Tico to becoming the new Field Marshal General of the SLA, a man who is a buffoon. The real Tico is a buffoon, and the William Forsythe betrayal is a buffoon. The character was already annoying, but he becomes insufferable at this point. Patty's next tape to the media outlines her fallen comrades.
I want to talk about the way I knew our 6 murdered comrades, because the fascist pig media has, of course, been painting a typically distorted picture of these beautiful sisters and brothers. Sin-Q loved the people with tenderness and respect. He helped me see that it's not how long we live that's important, it's how we live. Jelena was beautiful. She exploded with the desire to kill the pig. She taught me how to fight the enemy within through her constant struggle with bourgeois conditioning. Gabi practiced until her shotgun was an extension of her right and left arms. She taught me the patience and discipline necessary for survival and victory. Zoya, female guerrilla, perfect love and perfect hate reflected in stone-cold eyes. Faiza was a beautiful sister who taught me to shoot first and make sure the pig is dead before splitting, and I'll always love her. Cujo was the gentlest, most beautiful man I've ever known. Neither Cujo or I had ever loved an individual the way we loved each other. Our relationship's foundation was our commitment to the struggle and our love for the people. It's because of this that I still feel strong and determined to fight. Our comrades didn't die in vain. The pig lies about the advisability of surrender have only made me more determined. I renounced my class privilege when Sin and Cujo gave me the name Tanya. While I have no death wish, I have never been afraid of death. For this reason, the brainwashed duress theory of the pig Hearsts has always amused me. Life is very precious to me, but I have no delusions that going to prison will keep me alive. And I would never choose to live the rest of my life surrounded by pigs like the Hearsts. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people.
And this is something that is truly damning later on to her. But it's shown to be more of a ploy, sticking to the very specific narrative that we are being shown in this film. Patty does realize that the people hate her, though. Patty realizes at this point that the tables have turned, that she is not accepted, and that they don't care. She sees it in the media, she sees it in the news. They hate her, but they can't stop talking about her. We begin moving into the last parts of the movie, the laying low era, which is incredibly slow, and a lot of the momentum and what made the pacing and made the intensity of this film, it just kind of falls apart here. things go into a very relaxed, and I mentioned this very earlier, the whole soundtrack even begins to change, and it becomes this kind of sappy, we're going to learn something movie soundtrack, and it just really loses its pacing, and it's a little confusing because you're not shown any sympathy toward Tico, you're not shown any sympathy toward Yolanda, but Jody Long is introduced as Wendy Yoshimura, who is helping hide the remaining SLA members in Pennsylvania. And again, it's a character that you're not given a lot of depth with, you're not given a lot of background with, but what you are allowed to see is sympathy. You're allowed to see that the movie is going to continue fitting its one-sided narrative, but you learn that there are all types of women, something that she says to Tico after an altercation, that not everyone is going to back down to you, and I think you have an allowance in this point with this character to see that not all the female members of the SLA or people that were involved in these sort of radical organizations were just there for the autonomy. We're not just there to fit in, that she had a place, she had a persona, she had an identity, not just token characters, not just, it's a woman in the movie. There's a point to it, but still everything becomes much weaker and a little bit sloppier from this point out. And when I say things like this movie continues to fit its one-sided narrative, I don't mean to say that in an attacking manner, and I'm not trying to say it with any disregard to the storytelling on Paul Schrader's part, but that's just the truth. It is fitting and telling a one-sided narrative. I gotta keep talking about the different sides. I think I'm good on that, right? A new white SLA is formed by Tico and Yolanda. They turn the organization into a bunch of blundering, bank-robbing bombers. Terrorists, if you will. The farthest thing from revolutionaries that they could be. And for really no point, they're going to bomb a bunch of cops. All of these things, Patty was involved in. She wasn't just sitting around with her hands under her butt. She was involved in all of this. She was there for all of it. Again, the movie doesn't point out anything in this direction as to why she didn't walk away, but a lot of that is available for you to research on your own, that she truly felt that she couldn't. She was under their control. No longer Sin-Q, no longer Cujo, but Tico and Yolanda. But really, the SLA is no longer revolutionaries for the people. They are farther from what they started than they could be. A bland, personality-less wannabe is now in control, is calling the shots, and it's just for notoriety. It's just to do something. It's absolutely senseless. It's cowboy bullshit. But no one is in charge. No one at this point is in charge of the SLA, and it's very reminiscent of the modern left. There is no leaders, just many heads talking all at once. After the shootout in LA, Tico just turns it all to shit. A senseless reactionary with no ethos of his own. He has nothing. A hollow man, a straw man. And at this point, Patty just seems to almost incidentally be a part of the movie. Nothing really flows. You're given this introduction to the new SLA and all the bombings, and it's very washed over. This is some of the most devastating and heinous part of SLA's history, is when Tico becomes their leader, that they blindly begin, not even IRA style, ignorantly causing these bombings throughout the LA area, all in an attempt to kill police officers, and none of them are successful. And it's just destroying any potential that this organization had to be a front for peace. And I know that sounds ridiculous, because everything that they've been responsible for at this point has been violence and chaos. But at its theory, at its seed, at its core, there was an attempt or a call or a hope for some unionization of peace. And I said this earlier, every extremity, I think, has a formation similar in somebody's mindset that this is the right idea, this is the right thing that needs to be done, this is what's revolutionary. And people buy into it. They believe it. They have nothing else. I mean, what happens when the hunters become hunted? The SLA scared the FBI. That's why they came at them with fire. They thought Patty was in there. When they burned them down, they thought Patty was in that building. The FBI really loves playing with fire. And the CIA. All of them, all the acronyms. But they came in there with a cause, and they came in there with a purpose. Saving Patty Hearst was not their cause or purpose. Suddenly, Patty gets arrested, and it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, shit, that's what this movie's about. There's a whole thing going on here.
Good evening. Patty Hearst has been taken into custody. The FBI says Patty Hearst was picked up today in San Francisco. The Hearst newspaper heiress has been missing for 19 months. First, she was kidnapped. Then she announced that she had joined ranks with her kidnappers, members of the Symbionese Liberation Army. She called herself Tanya.
She was later indicted in connection with a San Francisco bank holdup and labeled a fugitive. Here, from Jess Marlowe in Los Angeles, is a report on what has happened to Patty Hearst since she was kidnapped.
Patty Hearst shared a $300 a month apartment with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. She was kidnapped the night of February 4th by 2 black men and a white woman. Witnesses said the abductors fired guns as they fled. Stephen Weed was badly beaten, but he said he would not testify against the suspects if Patty Hearst were released unharmed. 3 days later, the kidnappers sent a taped message identifying themselves as members of the Symbionese Liberation Army. The SLA's ransom demand was for free food. And the Hearst family and the Hearst Corporation bought $2 million worth. But the food giveaway plan was badly managed. The SLA said in a later tape, the giveaway was a sham. In April, the SLA used a San Francisco florist to deliver another message. It said the details of Patty's release would be made public within 3 days. But the next day, another tape dashed any hope Patty Hearst would be coming home.
I've been given the choice of 1, being released in a safe area, or 2, joining the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army and fighting for my freedom and the freedom of all oppressed people. I have chosen to stay and fight.
2 weeks later, on April 15th, 5 members of the SLA robbed the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco. 2 people were shot during the robbery, and the SLA gang got away with more than $10,000. The robbery was filmed by the bank's automatic cameras. The FBI said the girl in the wig with the automatic rifle was Patricia Hearst.
Yeah, and Cowboy Patty is at her best. Power to the people, power to Patty. She's arrested. The first photograph of her, an iconic photo sitting in the back of the police car with the power to the people fist, hidden behind sunglasses. This is what the world is introduced to. This is what America saw as Patty Hearst. A rebel. A terrorist. She's brought in and they ask her, what's your occupation? Because, this is the most important thing when you're being arrested. What's your occupation? And she tells them, another nail in her coffin, that she is an urban guerrilla. Hence why I keep using that term. And then I guess what you learn is it's all fun and games until they take your shoes away and lock you in a cell. And we return to a similar shooting style of something that we were presented at the very beginning of the film. A very lonely style. A very set-based style, heavy on lights, and what we're being shown is how far away we've been taken from everything that we've been exposed to. It's just seeping farther and farther away as it becomes more muddled with the sensationalism of the media. What you're shown here is that America wanted entertainment. Patty got sold up the river for entertainment, for media, for television. It was just the public gawking at her. They wanted something. They wanted answers, but not to the real questions. Why did you do this, Patty? Not why did this happen? Not why do these things happen in our country, but why did you do this, rich girl who had everything? You had all the money in the world. Why would you do this? Well, maybe because money doesn't fucking mean shit. Now, of course, in the right hands, money does. But in this situation, it was, just as everyone involved, bored white people. Patty's rape is even more shown at this point that it's not just physical, but it is everything. Everything is raped and taken from her. The doctors even say this is just a medical procedure. You're making it worse. Medical procedures to show and prove how many times she was raped and hurt. That even in this instance, she has nothing of her own. It's all been taken from her. Poignantly, Schrader tells us twice, through the mouth of Patty Hearst, I want to tell the truth, but I don't know what it is. And she tells her attorney this, and this is something that's very important because we're shown that Patty herself isn't lying. What we're shown is Patty just doesn't know. I have memories like holes in Swiss cheese is something she says. Patty is beaten with Freudian psychosexual psychology to get anything. Any answer that can be used. Anything that can just be jotted down on a piece of paper. She was brainwashed. She's brainwashed. It was definitely brainwashing. She was totally 100% brainwashed. And it doesn't impress America because, after all, she is a rich girl. While on the stand being berated, she even says, I'm just not sure what happened to me. And no one is, and no one will ever know. Was it brainwashing? Was it Stockholm Syndrome? Did she become so comfortable with her captors that she began robbing banks and helping making bombs and trying to kill pigs? Or was it her own ideology? Was it boredom? Was it raging against the machine and her own thoughts and aspects? What the movie ends with, I think, makes all of that not important. And it is. It's all of these things need to be taken into consideration. You can have this romantic bullshit idea of the Patty Hearst story. And I sympathize. I don't at all say that she wasn't raped. I don't say that she wasn't abused or that she wasn't brainwashed. Now, what I will say is if Patty had acted on her own, if there was no regard for brainwashing, if that ploy had never been used or brought up, I would still be on her side. I think Patty Hearst is a perfect example of what we do to the youth of our country. After all, when she was kidnapped, she was 19 years old, and I think sufficiently that is a youth. We do nothing to encourage the future. We do nothing to encourage the betterment of society, and we do nothing to make tomorrow a better place. What we do is secure the capital. We secure capitalist ideas. We secure the money, the capital. Not the capital of the country. Clearly, we don't secure that. Fucking $1 trillion budget and a bunch of hillbillies with AR-15s and swastika t-shirts can just walk right in. 4 years, Donald Trump's been saying we need to build a wall to keep the Mexicans out, and a bunch of fucking hillbillies just managed to scale the goddamn Senate wall. Wow, great! Patty Hearst scared people. Just like Sin Q, just like the word terrorism, just like the word socialism, just like the word communism. Unfortunately, the word fascism doesn't seem to scare people. That doesn't seem to revolutionize anymore. There's something really sad about that. There's something really heartbreaking about that. This was a hard story to tell, and I don't know how well I did it. I know a lot of my political ideologies seeped into this. I know the story is very muddled, and, just like this film, if I could have had 8 hours to do this in a miniseries, it probably would have worked a lot better. But that's not how it was done, and that's not how the Patty Hearst film was done. Obviously, things had to be compressed, but we're given enough for Patty's point of view, and I think we're given enough to have an understanding and see a point. And the point isn't just some awful kidnapping story. It's not just some jejune, to dust off a favorite word of mine, brainwashing story. There's a lot more to this. There are so many different angles. There are so many different sides that, unfortunately, will never, ever be told. But isn't that history in general? Isn't that everything that we're exposed to? We never have an actual story. And what we're given from the media, what the media controls and allows us to be given, rather, is never the truth. And it's always fanaticism. It is always shined up. It is always more than it appears to be. The facts are constantly hidden. The facts are always taken away. But that truly is the American way. I mean, why on God's green earth did men like Henry Kissinger ever have power? You want to tell me that fascism isn't live and well, that fascism isn't raging in the United States? You want to tell me that our leaders, our elected officials, are not fascists? I can't buy that. I can't abide by that, and I can't take it. I'm not saying that the answer to all of this is radicalizing and starting your own liberation army, but what I'm saying is that there are different sides to absolutely every single story, even something as sympathetic as this. I'm not telling you to disregard all the things that Patty Hearst has had to say. You should look at her story. You should look at her side of the story. And it should radicalize you. It should give you strong feelings of disdain to our country, unfortunately. And I don't mean that in a fuck the government anarchy. No. That's not what we're saying. But you should be hurt. You should be disgusted, for one, that they did this to an individual, that this happened to Patty Hearst, but this happened to so many other people. She wasn't the only person involved. Sin Q, Cujo, all these revolutionaries, terrorists, yuppies, prisoners, felons, monsters, thugs, goons, warriors, whatever you want to call them. They all had a life. They all had a soul. They all had a purpose. And all of these people were brought together completely under common beliefs that were instilled by the world into them. It's not like they came up with these ideas on their own. These people were radicalized by a system that radicalizes people to shoot them down. These people were radicalized by a system that radicalizes people to shoot them down as examples, as to say that you shouldn't be this way or you're going to be shot down. And all the villains, all the boogeymen, all the nasty people that we can talk about that live in our society, most of them have been perpetuated by the fascist machine, by the blood-sucking beast that really is out there to get you. It's not Freddy Krueger coming for you in your dreams. It's just your hopes and dreams being withered away by a machine that wants you to die for it, wants you to sacrifice yourself and your family for it. And for what? What do you get? What do you get out of it outside of, well, I worked every single day of my life, and then when I finally got cancer, my healthcare couldn't cover it. But you know what? That's the American way. Doesn't make sense. Work your entire life to die for nothing. I'm not saying fight, not perpetuating terrorism. Just saying there's something you need to question, something that you need to look at when it comes to the bigger picture of things. And the easiest way to show you that there are different perspectives and there are so many different sides to a story is the Patty Hearst story itself. We know what she has to say, but we don't know what everyone else has to say, and we never will. We have communiques, we have letters, we have propaganda from both sides, and we'll never really know the truth. What can I say? Patty is found guilty and sent to prison for her crimes, which are pretty serious crimes. 2 bank robberies, one she participated in directly, and one she was a getaway driver for, multiple attempted murders with the bombings, and though never effective, they were trying to kill cops. Her sentence was eventually commuted for all this by Jimmy Carter, and I guess just went back to normal life. Normal millionaire, billionaire life. In the early 2000s, the surviving SLA members were brought up on murder charges for the other bank robbery committed nearly 30 years prior. They were all found guilty and had to serve additional time, except for Patty, who had been pardoned by Slick Willie Clinton in 1999. If that doesn't say something about the history of presidential pardons, I guess history really does fall on deaf ears. Seems like that Hearst money really came in handy after all. The rich take care of the rich. I wonder if they spent more money on Patty's court cases than what the SLA had asked for the food program in the first place. I bet they did. I mean, you've got the whole getting it commuted thing and all the appeals, and I mean, it's not like they hired cheap defense. And then, God, years later, I mean, 1999, Patty Hearst is pardoned. In the long run, they probably spent twice as much as it would have to have fed the poor and hungry in Oakland, or LA, or any other city in California. I guess that doesn't matter anymore. Fuck them. Fuck the hungry. Fuck them. Fuck them. Patty says at the end of the movie while talking to her lawyer, fuck them all. They'll never get it. The people will never get it. So fuck them. Which almost gives the appearance that Patty didn't learn anything from this. Which isn't entirely true because she learned money can eventually get you a presidential pardon. Her sentence was commuted by Carter. Clinton pardoned her, just like Cheeto did Lil Wayne. Exactly like Lil Wayne. God fucking damn it. What a world. What a world we live in. And we just traded in the cheddar Cheeto for the white cheddar Cheeto. So here's to the new boss. Same as the old boss. Nothing really changes, just a new face to the same old monster. Patty not being tried and found guilty for a second time doesn't change anything. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't magically make the death of Myrna Opshaw disappear, something Patty was involved in. I mean, she's the getaway driver in a scenario that led to somebody's death. Regardless, she should have been tried just as well as everyone else that was and found guilty and ended up serving 7 to 8 years on top of their additional sentences they'd already served. Yet alone, the 2 deaths that took place during a robbery that she, Patty Hearst, was actively holding a gun for. I wonder if anyone that was affected by the actions of Patty Hearst got any of that sweet, sweet, sweet Hearst money. Or did it just go to her getting commuted and pardoned? I don't know. What can I say? What I can say we do know is the people were always against Patty, and the people are still against Patty, and they will always be. But it doesn't change that she was found guilty by a jury of 12 peers that looked at her and said, "You're a rich girl. You've gone too far. Because you know it don't matter anyway. You can get by on the old man's money, and we don't care. You can get by on the old man's money. You can get by on the old man's money." What's important is that this was Patty's story, and it was told beautifully. This is what we got. This is what we got from Paul Schrader, and this is what you get. You can look at this movie and you can see it as a dramatic, artistic struggle. You can see it as this portrayal of one person's story to overcome everything, or you can look at everything else involved, and you can see the corruption and the hate and the sickness. And you can truly see why this is a movie that Paul Schrader was just made to make. Something that's unique with all of his stories is every single one of his main characters tends to be very, very self-destructive, even like Travis Bickle. It's not so much about them, but about their destruction or their lack of humanity or their lack of regard for humanity. And Patty might not have known who she was when she went into this, but when she came out, she knew something. She definitely knew something. Now, does it matter if Patty Hearst had visited Sin Q in prison before the kidnapping? Does it matter that she became radicalized in her own dorm room while studying at UC Berkeley? No. Doesn't matter when. Doesn't matter why. What matters is that it happened and we've managed to forget. We've managed to forget so easily. I mean, what's going to have to go down next? Noah Cyrus get kidnapped and no one have to give a shit about it? Not even that rich. Talking about the most rich people in the world, and I fucking reference one of Billy Ray Cyrus's kids. Jesus Christ. You get the drift. Fuck it, let's go back to that Elon Musk reference. Fuck that guy, fuck his kids, fuck his family. But look, no, that's the problem. Oh no, I'm doing the same thing that everyone did to Patty Hearst in 1974. Ah! Shit. Look at me, I'm even guilty of the fascist insect that feeds upon us. And it's perception. It's all 100%. Not just my perception or your perception, but what we're given by the goddamn media, what we are allowed to know, and what we are given to know. We can turn and hate people we've never met. Now, Elon Musk really is somebody you should hate. He is kind of a fucking asshole. Nobody that owns lithium mines should be recognized as a good person. Hey, I'm going to come up with this great technology that can send us to space. Surprise, I'm going to use it to deliver weapons. Because selling guns really makes a lot of money. The Patty Hearst show just quickly became the fuck Elon Musk show. Patty Hearst supported this film at Cannes in 1988 when it was released. Something that is kind of humorous. Patty went with Paul Schrader to the release of this movie, where a very, very hyped up John Waters found Paul Schrader and told him, I'm a fucking fanatic, I gotta meet her. Got to have dinner with Patty, and the rest is history. We've got that amazing scene in Serial Mom, the White After Labor Day scene. But the rich girl gets out of prison. That's what ends up happening here. Patty gets out of prison. An eventual pardon. The others, they were burned to death in L.A. An unfortunate end to the story. Whether Patty was brainwashed or not, people are still starving, and the fascist insect is still preying rampantly upon the people. The sensationalist aspect of the story renders what the SLA wanted originally not important, because at the end of the day, all anyone could care about was the media frenzy. Obviously, under TICO and SIN-Q also, the SLA is guilty of acts of terror. But what difference is the U.S. government? Sometimes, most of the time, the far left and the far right are one and the same. After that, everything is lost and forgotten. The point now just lost in time under the dust of bullshit. Before we get out of here and end this episode, I've got something I'd like to read you people. This article comes from 1974. To 1974, to be exact. Written by Bernard R. Smallwood, a former Central Committee member in Bancheramos, one of the organizations that would visit prisons in the late 1960s and early 70s, an organization that could be held responsible for the indoctrination and radicalization of Sin-Q, a.k.a. Donald DeFreeze. Yes, the left in general is freaked out by the Symbionese Liberation Army. They are freaked out because there is no real leadership, no direction in the New Left movement itself. The only thing the leaders within the New Left know about the SLA is that they don't like it. And the primary reason for this attitude is a feeling that the actions of the SLA will only increase police repression. But these leaders fail to understand why groups like the SLA come about. They focus primarily on the cart and ignore the horse. In other words, just as the mass media, they are focusing on the symptoms and ignoring the problems. The facts that hunger, poor housing, racism, sexism, and no jobs at all exist. These conditions are very real, and they are all integral parts of this society affecting primarily people of color and poor white working people. These so-called leaders of the left understand that it is wrong to dictate to the people that they want and how to go about getting it without consulting them. However, they fail to understand that it is equally wrong to not be prepared to engage in struggle when the people are ready. It is true that the police and the mass media are attempting to use the SLA to discredit all struggles for radical change in this country, and this is bad. But I believe that it is possible to turn a bad thing into a good thing. And in order for us to do this, our priorities must service and response to the need and problems of the people. And any decisions to be made affecting the people must involve their participation and determination. Of course, in order to do this successfully, we must have an organization with leadership representative of the people. It is unfortunate that the needs and problems of the people, which are a reality, receive public attention only when critical situations like this arise. I feel that the key questions here is what lessons are the American people, including the new left, going to learn from the situations we are now confronted with? Are we going to call for harder crackdown on all the people struggling for radical change in this country? Are we going to call for new laws to give increased power to the police? Are we going to forget that it is, in fact, the oppression and the violence of the state which gives rise to groups such as SLA? There is a historical lesson we can draw from our government's involvement in Vietnam, namely, that oppression, exploitation, i.e. U.S. imperialism, breeds resistance. Wherever oppression exists, the people will fight back, even if it means giving up their lives. The ghettos and jails in America, which are nothing more than concentration camps for the poor, are breeding grounds for resistance. Where else can the poor, the so-called criminals, get together to draw up plans to defend themselves? In these Nazi-like concentration camps, the poor are students, and there they learn, namely, that their only solution for survival is violence against the system using violence against them. I will say to the Nixons, the Rockefellers, and the Hearsts, and to their puppets and the state police that their solution to this resistance is not to kill and destroy the resistors, but to eliminate the social conditions which give rise to the resistance. And yes, we would prefer that these social changes take place by peaceful means, but experience has shown that the ruling class will never relinquish power voluntarily. The government will never, even in a period of crisis such as Watergate, the energy crisis, etc., unless it is pushed. Understanding this, it would be wrong to individually go out wolfing at the system with BB guns because the puppets of the ruling class with their military power will kill you, and they do. In order to be successful, we must push with the people, not against them. To push alone would only give the state police reason to take a better aim with their war machine against the people, especially the poor. Young American men were forced to commit immoral, terrorist acts overseas, but they have now returned home, very much skilled in how to fight the enemy. They have taught their sisters and brothers these skills, and they are now fighting for a cause they themselves consider just. They have just brought the war home. However, the irony of the U.S. ruling class continues even with the kidnapping of Patricia Hearst. How much media attention would be given if the daughter of a poor black family was kidnapped? How many thousands of dollars would be sent to the family by the Nixons, the Reagans, and yes, the Hearsts? Even more important, would the people themselves care, or has the ruling class-controlled mass media convinced them that they should only be concerned when the sons and daughters of rich men are kidnapped? It is true that the SLA is using revolution through the media tactics. The SLA's tactics and strategy for revolution are being published in full, the same as Nixon's speeches. Never before has the mass media shown such a high interest in the left. They are even quoting Lenin and Mao, not to deal with just the demands put forward by the SLA, but rather to condemn their tactics. They are still asking, what do these people want? The demands put forward by the SLA should have been met yesterday by rich America. But even now, at the risk of Patricia Hearst's life, they still choose to focus primarily on who did it instead of why they did it. In closing, I will say to all people who claim they want to struggle, is it necessary for us to follow the path of the ruling class and their mass media? Could we not better serve the people by dealing primarily with the objective realities of hunger, poor housing, lack of jobs, racism, sexism, etc., all which are social conditions directly affecting the poor? I will strongly question the sincerity of those who choose to deal primarily with their subjective feelings about Patricia Hearst and the SLA. Again, this article was written by Bernard R. Smallwood, a former Central Committee member in the Venturomos. So where does that leave us? Well, the ashtray is full, and the bottle is empty. Power to the people, and power to Patty Hearst, a real urban guerrilla. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people.
Death by DVD is recorded in front of a dead studio audience.
I was standing about 100 yards away when police found their target, a yellow one-story house on 54th near Compton. A live CBS camera crew was on the scene, and this is what it looked like.
Let's see if we couldn't still get this picture, but from a little better location, huh?
Well, I don't know if it's a good idea to interview somebody right now.
That's a mighty thin palm tree right in front of us.
We just took a bullet a couple inches or so because we felt it go by. We felt it go by, that's right. And heard it. And that's as close as I want to be to one, let me tell you.
It was about then that a lone black woman came stumbling from the front of the house, her hands bound behind her, gasping from the tear gas. The woman shouted at the attacking police that she was giving up and that she had been held hostage. Officers rushed into the crossfire and pulled her bodily out of the danger area. Under intense questioning, she told police that there were 4 more heavily armed people inside, and all the while the battle continued. A short time later, no one really knew why, fire was spotted coming from the house.
It appears to have spread to the adjacent house. It does. It is just unbelievable that there could be anybody in there shooting back. We were told earlier in the afternoon that there was a basement in that house. Perhaps the people who were being sought were in that basement. It so that would give them a few more minutes to stay alive and fire back. Oh, boy, not much more than that. Look at the huge ball of smoke and flame going up out of here now.
And south ends of the battle zone, but police would not allow them near the blaze because in spite of the inferno, firing from the house continued, much of it organized, some of it the explosions caused by round upon round of ammunition igniting in that intense heat. Huge clouds of dense black smoke blew eastward from the house and could be seen for miles. The flames destroyed the target house and heavily damaged 2 others. It was a full hour later, after the firefight began, that firemen were finally allowed in the area. Luckily, they were able to extinguish the flames quickly before the blaze spread further. But suddenly, in the space of slightly more than an hour, what had been a relatively quiet neighborhood had become a battleground, and then a scene of total desolation. The experience of watching the Holocaust in progress was more shocking, more terrifying than anything I have ever experienced. I crouched on the floor of a corner grocery store about 100 yards from the bombardment for more than half an hour with about 15 men, women, and children, all part confused, part excited, and all of them.
Psychological warfare will be used throughout the struggle for freedom. We must combat enemy attempts to demoralize us, for in the face of the failure to achieve military solutions against the People's Army, the enemy has to then step up its efforts in the propaganda war. Their aim is to, 1, to prevent a liberation movement from getting underway by destroying it at its source, that is, by undermining the will to fight. And 2, where revolutionary warfare has actually begun, to conquer it by political means, that is to say, by granting just sufficient political, economic, and social reform for the moment to encourage all but the so-called extremists to abandon the struggle and then kill off the leadership of the people, as in the period of King and Malcolm, and then reinstate as they did the oppression and murder of the then defenseless people. In stating these facts, we wish to say that the collective leadership of the SLA would not under any circumstances or any terms compromise our position or that of the people's freedom, and no one should attempt to speak for us or assume that they by word or action can compromise any request made in behalf of the people by the SLA. On this point, we wish to state that the organizations who wish to take part in feeding the people should also cry out for the thousands of children of all colors who have been murdered and starved by the enemy state. They should cry out for the millions of children of all races that are starving and dying now, and not just cry out for the safety of one human being who just happens to be the daughter of an enemy of the people. Fight and cry out in the defense of millions and save the children. And by this action you will save also the life of one who has never seen the robbed or knew that the riches of her life were the spoils of a robber and murderer. It is in the judgment of this court that the Hearst family and the Hearst Corporation seems to be more foolishly concerned with the identities of supposed SLA elements rather than with the admission to the people of the crimes committed against the people by the Hearst Empire. By an act of good faith and a true showing to the people, not to the SLA, the Hearst Empire should demonstrate a change of interest, regret for its crimes against the people, and a firm decision that they will no longer be a party to such actions in the future. They should also demonstrate that they are not only concerned with freeing and making a better life for Patricia, but also freeing and making a better life for all the people. However, they have seemingly said by their actions that they know me, and therefore they do not have to repent for their crimes. However, to this I would say, yes, you do indeed know me. You have always known me. I'm that nigger you have hunted and feared night and day. I'm that nigger you have killed hundreds of my peoples in a vain hope of finding. I'm that nigger that is no longer just a hunted, robbed, and murdered. I'm the nigger that hunts you now. Yes, you know me. You know us all. You know me, I'm the wetback. You know me, I'm the gook, the broad, the servant, the spick. Yes, indeed, you know us all, and we know you, the oppressor, murderer, and robber. And you have hunted and robbed and exploited us all. Now we are the hunters that will give you no rest, and we will not compromise the freedom of our children. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people.